Cole Barrett never expected to find a dying woman face down in Willow Creek that October afternoon. The elderly stranger's gray hair floated like seaweed in the shallow water, her frail body so still he thought she was already gone. But when his 6-year-old daughter Emma screamed, the woman's fingers twitched, a desperate grasp at life itself. What Cole didn't know as he lifted that fragile body from the creek was that saving her life would unravel secrets of betrayal, greed, and stolen fortunes. Some debts, he would learn, can never truly be repaid. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. The Wyoming sky stretched endless and cold above Cole Barrett's ranch that Tuesday afternoon, the kind of October day where the wind carried warnings of the winter to come. He'd been riding the fence line along the eastern property for 3 hours. Emma perched in front of him on the saddle, her small hands gripping the horn while she chattered about the clouds shaped like rabbits and castles. At 6 years old, she saw magic everywhere. Cole envied that. "Daddy, can we check the creek before we go home?" Emma twisted to look up at him with those green eyes that were so much like her mother's. It still caught him off guard sometimes, even 2 years after Sarah's death. "Creek's out of the way a little bit." Cole adjusted his hat against the slanting sun. "Your grandma's expecting us for supper." "Please? Just real quick. I want to see if there are any pretty stones." Cole sighed, but he was already turning the horse toward Willow Creek. He'd never been able to deny Emma much, and she knew it. The creek ran along the northwestern corner of his property, a thin ribbon of water that barely deserved the name except during spring runoff. This time of year, it was more mud than creek, shallow enough to step across in most places. They crested the low ridge, and Emma pointed. "Look, Daddy, is that a log?" Cole's hand went instinctively to the rifle secured to his saddle. His eyes, trained by years of frontier living to spot what didn't belong, had already registered that the dark shape in the water wasn't driftwood. It was too symmetrical, too still, too human. "Emma, close your eyes." "But, now baby, close them tight." He dismounted in one fluid motion, lifting Emma down and setting her on the grass. "Stay right here with Thunder. Don't move, don't look, you understand?" Emma nodded, squeezing her eyes shut, her small face suddenly frightened. Cole's boots splashed into the creek, icy water soaking through to his socks as he waded toward the body. It was a woman, that much was clear. Gray hair spread around her head like a tarnished halo, face down in no more than 4 inches of water. Her dress was torn, mud-caked, the fabric so worn he couldn't tell what color it had originally been. Dead, he thought. Had to be. Nobody could survive lying face down in a creek, even a shallow one. But he reached for her anyway, years of ranching having taught him that you checked, always checked, because the moment you assumed was the moment you were wrong. His fingers found her shoulder, and he rolled her gently onto her back. Her eyes flew open. Emma screamed behind him. She'd looked, of course she'd looked. And the woman's mouth opened in a soundless gasp, creek water spilling from her lips. Her hand shot up and grabbed Cole's wrist with surprising strength for someone who looked half dead, her fingernails digging into his skin. "Please." The word was barely a whisper, more breath than sound. "Please don't leave me." Cole's heart hammered against his ribs. The woman's face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp beneath skin that was gray-white except where the cold had mottled it purple. Her eyes were a faded blue, clouded with pain and something else, a desperate, pleading fear that cut right through him. "I've got you," Cole said, forcing his voice steady. "I've got you, ma'am. You're safe now." He slid his arms beneath her. She weighed almost nothing, light as a child, and lifted her from the water. She didn't let go of his wrist, her grip trembling but insistent. "Emma," Cole called, turning carefully. "Ride Thunder back to the house, fast as you can. Tell Grandma to heat water and get blankets ready. Can you do that?" Emma stood frozen, her eyes wide and brimming with tears. "Is she dead?" "No, baby, but she needs help. I need you to be brave and ride fast. Go on now." Emma scrambled onto Thunder with the ease of a child who'd been riding before she could walk. She gathered the reins with shaking hands, kicked her heels, and the horse took off toward the ranch house at a gallop. Cole looked down at the woman in his arms. Her eyes had closed again, but he could feel her breathing, shallow and rapid against his chest. "Stay with me," he murmured. Just stay with me. The walk back to the ranch took 15 minutes that felt like hours. The woman didn't speak again, didn't move except for the occasional shudder that ran through her entire body. Cole talked to her anyway, the same low, steady voice he used with spooked horses. You're gonna be all right. My ma's got healing hands. She's brought back worse than this. We've got a warm house, good fire, hot soup. You'll see. Just hang on a little longer. By the time the ranch house came into view, Cole's arms were aching and his shirt was soaked through with creek water. Emma had done her job. Smoke was billowing from the chimney, and his mother stood on the porch, blankets draped over her arms. Dear Lord, Martha Barrett breathed as Cole climbed the steps. Cole, who is this? Don't know. Found her in the creek. She's half frozen and half starved by the look of her. Martha had already moved into action, spreading blankets on the sofa near the fireplace. Put her here. Emma, fetch the spare nightgown from my chest. Move, child. Cole laid the woman down as gently as he could. Her hand finally released his wrist, falling limply to her side. Martha was already pulling off the soaked, tattered dress, making soft clicking sounds with her tongue. Lord have mercy, Martha whispered. Cole, her feet. Cole looked. The woman's feet were bloody and raw, the skin torn away in places, blackened with dirt and infection. She'd been walking for days, maybe longer. No shoes, no protection, just walking until she couldn't walk anymore. Who would do this? Emma's small voice came from the doorway, the nightgown clutched in her hands. Hush now, Martha said firmly, though her eyes were bright with anger. Bring that here, then go fill the kettle and set it on the stove. For the next hour, they worked in synchronized silence, born of years together. Martha cleaned the woman's wounds with careful hands while Cole kept the fire roaring. Emma fetched water, blankets, rags, whatever her grandmother needed. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally moaning but never fully waking. Think she'll make it? Cole asked when Martha finally sat back wiping her hands on her apron. Can't say. She's got fever starting and those feet… But Martha shook her head. Infections set in deep. But she's a fighter, this one. You can see it. She didn't give up out there in that creek, did she? No, Cole agreed. She asked me not to leave her. Then we won't. Martha stood, her knees cracking. She's in the Lord's hands now, but we'll do our part. Emma, come here, sweetheart. Emma approached slowly, her eyes fixed on the woman's face. Is she going to die, Grandma? We're going to do everything we can to make sure she doesn't. Martha pulled Emma into a hug. You did good today, riding fast like your daddy asked. You might have helped save her life. Emma's lower lip trembled. She looked so scared. I imagine she was, Martha said softly. But she's safe now. That night, Cole sat in the chair beside the sofa, watching the woman sleep. Martha had insisted on taking the first watch, but Cole had sent her to bed. She'd done enough for one day, and at 63 she needed her rest more than he did. Emma had finally fallen asleep in her own bed upstairs, though it had taken 3 stories and a promise that the woman would still be alive in the morning. The firelight danced across the woman's face, and Cole studied her properly for the first time. She was old, 70, maybe more, with deep lines around her eyes and mouth. But there was something in her face, even ravaged by hunger and exposure, that spoke of strength. The set of her jaw, the way her hands, even in sleep, were curled as if ready to fight. Around midnight, her eyes opened. For a long moment, she just stared at the ceiling, her expression distant. Then her gaze found Cole, and awareness flooded back. Easy, Cole said. You're safe. You're in my home. She tried to sit up and immediately gasped in pain, collapsing back against the pillows. Your feet are in bad shape, Cole said. You need to stay still. Can you drink something? She nodded, a tiny movement. Cole lifted a cup of water to her lips, supporting her head with his other hand. She drank in small, desperate sips, water running down her chin. Slow down. Not too much at once or you'll be sick. She fell back again, panting. Thank you. Her voice was raspy, barely above a whisper. Thank you for not leaving me there. What's your name? Her eyes slid away from his. Does it matter? I'd like to know who I pulled out of my creek. A long pause. Margaret Doyle. Well, Mrs. Doyle, Miss. Miss Doyle, I'm Cole Barrett. This is my ranch. You're safe here. Safe? She repeated, as if the word was foreign. I haven't been safe in a very long time. What happened to you? She closed her eyes. I'm very tired. Miss Doyle. Please. I'm so tired. Cole recognized a wall when he saw one. All right, rest. We'll talk later. But she was already asleep, or pretending to be. Over the next 3 days, Margaret Doyle remained mostly silent. She slept 20 hours out of every 24, her body desperately trying to heal itself. When she was awake, she drank the broths Martha prepared and accepted the bandage changes without complaint. But she answered no questions about where she'd come from or how she'd ended up face down in Willow Creek. Emma, however, seemed to break through the silence in a way Cole and Martha couldn't. On the 4th day, Cole found his daughter sitting on the floor beside the sofa, chattering away about her doll collection, while Margaret listened, the faintest smile touching her cracked lips. And this one is Rosie, but she lost her arm when I dropped her down the stairs, so Grandma sewed it back on, see? She's almost good as new except the stitches show. Daddy says scars make us stronger. Do you have scars? Margaret's eyes found Emma's face. More than I can count, child. Do they hurt? Not the ones you can see. Emma considered this with the seriousness only a 6-year-old could muster. Mama died, she said finally. That gave Daddy a scar on his heart. I can't see it, but I know it's there. Margaret's hand, trembling slightly, reached out and touched Emma's hair. You're a wise little girl. I'm not little. I'm 6 3/4. My mistake. That smile again, stronger this time. 6 3/4 is quite grown up. Cole, listening from the doorway, felt something tight in his chest ease slightly. Emma had that effect on people. She could find the crack in any armor and slip right through with her earnest questions and unshakable belief that everyone was fundamentally good. By the end of the first week, Margaret could sit up without assistance. By the end of the second, she could hobble a few steps with a makeshift cane Cole had fashioned from an old broom handle. Her feet were healing, though Martha warned the scars would be permanent. I've been nothing but a burden, Margaret said one morning as Martha changed her bandages. You've all been so kind, and I've given you nothing but trouble and expense. Hush that talk, Martha said firmly. You're a human being who needed help. That's not a burden. It's a blessing. A blessing? Margaret's laugh was bitter. I doubt that. The good book says we entertain angels unaware. Maybe you're our angel. I'm no angel, Mrs. Barrett. Well, neither am I, but that doesn't stop the Lord from using me. Martha tied off the final bandage. Besides, Emma's taken a shine to you. That child hasn't smiled this much since her mama passed. Margaret looked toward the window where Emma was playing in the yard, her laughter drifting in on the autumn breeze. She's a special child. That she is. Takes after her mother in that way. What happened, if you don't mind my asking? Martha was quiet for a moment, her hands still on Margaret's feet. Fever. Came on sudden after Emma was born. Took her in 3 days. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. Cole was devastated. Still is, truth be told, though he hides it well. Threw himself into the ranch, into raising Emma. Sometimes I think he's forgotten how to be anything but a father and a rancher. He's a good man, Margaret said softly. The best I know. Takes after his father in that way. Martha's eyes were distant. My Henry would have done the same thing. Brought home a stranger who needed help without a second thought. Got himself killed that way, in fact. I'm sorry. Don't be. He died doing what was right, helping a neighbor whose barn was burning. That's more than most people get. Martha gathered the soiled bandages. Point is, kindness runs in this family. So stop fretting about being a burden and focus on getting well. That afternoon, Margaret asked if she might sit on the porch. Cole carried her out. She still weighed almost nothing, though Martha's cooking was starting to fill in the sharp angles of her face. He settled her in the rocking chair with a blanket over her lap. Thank you, Margaret said as Cole turned to go. It's just a chair. It's more than that, you know it is. Cole studied her face, seeing for the first time something beyond the frailty and fear. Intelligence, strength, a kind of quiet dignity that even near starvation and exposure hadn't erased. Who are you really? He asked. And I don't mean your name. Margaret was quiet for so long Cole thought she wouldn't answer. Then, I'm someone who used to be important, who used to matter, who had a life and a home, and people who claimed to love me. Claim to? Her hands tightened on the armrests. Words are cheap, Mr. Barrett. Actions are what count, and their actions made it very clear what I was worth to them. What did they do? She shook her head. It doesn't matter now. It does if you were left to die in a creek on my property. Why? So you can feel righteous in your rescue? The words came out sharper than she'd apparently intended, and she closed her eyes. I'm sorry. That was unkind. You've been nothing but generous. I've been decent. There's a difference. Cole leaned against the porch railing. And I'm not looking for gratitude. I'm trying to understand why someone would abandon an elderly woman in the middle of nowhere. Because I was in the way. Because I had something they wanted, and it was easier to take it if I wasn't around to object. Her eyes opened, and they were fierce. Because people are capable of terrible things when money is involved. Family. Her laugh was sharp and humorless. My sister's children. My own nephew and niece. Blood is supposed to mean something, isn't it? Supposed to count for loyalty, for love. She looked out at the vast Wyoming landscape, the mountains purple in the distance. But blood doesn't mean a damn thing when there's an inheritance to fight over. Cole was silent, letting her talk. I was a fool, Margaret continued, her voice dropping. I trusted them. When my sister died 5 years ago, her children came to me, said they wanted to take care of me in my old age, said I shouldn't be alone in that big house in Denver. They were so attentive, so loving. She spat the word like poison. So I changed my will, made them my heirs, gave them access to my accounts to help with expenses, signed papers they told me were for my protection. And they stole from you, stole everything, the house, the land, my savings, my late husband's investments, everything I'd spent 60 years building. Her hands were shaking now. And when I finally understood what they'd done, when I confronted them, they told me I was senile, confused, that I'd given them everything willingly because I couldn't take care of myself anymore. So they threw you out. They put me in a coach with a handful of coins and told the driver to take me to a charitable institution in Cheyenne. Said it was for my own good. Margaret's voice cracked. The driver felt sorry for me, gave me some bread and left me at a way station about 40 miles north of here. Said he couldn't in good conscience take me any farther, that the institution was a horror house where old people went to die. Why didn't you go to the authorities? With what proof? They'd been careful. Every document I'd signed was legal or looked legal enough. And who would believe a confused old woman over two respectable members of Denver society? She wiped her eyes roughly. I started walking. Thought maybe I could reach Cheyenne on my own, find someone who would listen. But I had no money, no food. When my shoes fell apart, I kept walking anyway. What else was there to do? Lie down and die? Cole felt anger burning hot in his chest. So you walked until you collapsed in my creek. I didn't collapse. I laid down. Margaret looked at him directly. I'd been walking for 6 days. My feet were ruined. I'd had nothing but creek water for 3 days. I knew I wasn't going to make it. So when I reached that particular stretch of creek, I thought it was as good a place as any to die. Cool water, quiet, no one to bother with my body. You were giving up. I was being practical. She paused. But then I heard a horse, heard a child laughing, and I thought if they found my body, that little girl would have nightmares. So I tried to get up, tried to get away before you saw me, but I couldn't move anymore. Cole exhaled slowly. I'm glad you couldn't. Are you? I've brought nothing but trouble to your doorstep. You've brought my daughter back to life, Cole said quietly. You've given my mother someone to fuss over besides me. You've reminded us that there's a world outside this ranch that still needs tending to. He pushed off the railing. That's not trouble, Miss Doyle. That's a gift. Margaret stared at him, something shifting behind her eyes. You're an unusual man, Cole Barrett. I'm just a rancher who found someone who needed help. No, Margaret said firmly. You're more than that, and I intend to prove it to you. Over the following weeks, Margaret transformed. Martha's cooking and care worked their magic, and color returned to her face. The sharp edges of starvation smoothed out. Her hair, washed and properly brushed, turned out to be silver rather than gray. and when Martha pinned it up, it gave her an almost regal bearing. But more than her physical transformation, it was her presence in the house that changed things. She insisted, despite protests, on helping where she could. She couldn't stand for long periods, but she could sit and mend clothes with stitches so tiny and precise they were nearly invisible. She could polish silver, shell peas, and tell stories that had Emma hanging on every word. "Tell me about the ball again," Emma begged one evening, curled up at Margaret's feet by the fire. "Which ball, darling? There were so many. The one with the ice sculptures." Margaret smiled, her hands never stopping their work on the shirt she was mending. "Ah, that was the governor's ball in '78. My late husband James was quite influential in territorial politics then. They brought in ice all the way from the mountains, packed in sawdust, and had sculptors from San Francisco carve it into swans and castles right there in the ballroom." "Real swans?" "Ice swans. But they look so real in the candlelight, you'd swear they might fly away." Margaret's voice took on a faraway quality. "I wore a blue gown, sapphire blue, James called it, with pearls at my throat. We danced until dawn." Cole, pretending to read the newspaper, listened to the longing in her voice. This wasn't the story of a confused old woman. This was someone who'd had power, influence, a real life, someone whose past had been stolen along with her property. "Did you have children?" Emma asked. The mending stilled in Margaret's hands. "No, James and I were never blessed that way. It was our great sorrow." "So you're all alone?" "Emma," Martha said warningly, but Margaret reached down and stroked Emma's hair. "Not anymore, sweetheart. Not anymore." Later that night, after Emma had been tucked into bed with promises of more stories tomorrow, Cole found Margaret still sitting by the fire. The house was quiet. Martha long since retired to her room. "Can't sleep?" Cole asked. "Old women don't need much sleep." Margaret set aside her mending. "Sit with me a moment?" Cole settled into the chair across from her. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I owe you an explanation," Margaret said. "You don't owe me anything." "I do. You saved my life, and I've been living in your home for nearly a month. You deserve to know the truth of what you've taken in." Cole waited. Margaret drew a breath. "My husband James Doyle was one of the founding partners of the Rocky Mountain Development Company. Do you know it?" Cole nodded. Everyone in Wyoming knew the RMDC. They owned half the mining claims in the territory and had built 3 of the major rail connections. "When James died 8 years ago, he left me very wealthy. Not just comfortable, wealthy. Property in Denver, mining shares, railroad investments, land holdings throughout Colorado and Wyoming." She looked into the fire. "I had no children to leave it to, so when my sister Constance died and her children Thomas and Beatrice came to me, I thought perhaps I'd been given a second chance at family. They saw an opportunity. They saw a fool, and I was one." Her jaw tightened. "Thomas is a lawyer, very well respected in Denver. He handled all the paperwork. Told me it was just reorganization, making things easier to manage in my old age. I signed everything he put in front of me because I trusted him. Because he called me Aunt Margaret and brought his sister to tea every Sunday and asked after my health with such concern." "When did you realize?" 6 months ago. I went to my bank to make a withdrawal and was told my accounts had been closed. Transferred to Thomas Doyle's management, they said. I went home and found Thomas and Beatrice waiting for me with a doctor I'd never seen before." Her voice went flat. "The doctor examined me for perhaps 5 minutes and declared me mentally incompetent. Signed papers to that effect. Thomas had already filed for conservatorship. It was done before I even understood what was happening. There must be someone who can help." "Other family? Friends?" Margaret's laugh was bitter. "Most of my friends were James's friends, and they died along with him. The few who remain, well, Thomas and Beatrice were very thorough. They contacted everyone I knew, told them I'd become confused and paranoid, that I was making wild accusations. By the time I tried to reach out, I'd already been branded as senile. There has to be legal recourse. Against a prominent lawyer with a doctor's statement of incompetence and legal documents I myself signed?" Margaret shook her head. "I tried. I went to 3 different law firms. None would take the case. Thomas has too much influence, too many connections, and I had no proof. He'd been clever enough to make sure every transaction looked legitimate." Cole leaned forward. So when you confronted them, Thomas told me very calmly that I could either accept a small monthly stipend and move into a charitable home, or I could fight him and end up in an asylum. She met his eyes. He actually threatened me with an asylum, Cole. Said he'd have me committed if I caused any more trouble. His own aunt. That's when they put you on the coach. That's when I realized I had no choices left. So yes, they put me on a coach with $20 and directions to a home for indigent elderly in Cheyenne. I'm told it's where people go to die slowly of neglect and despair. She stood carefully, her feet still tender. The driver took pity on me, left me at that way station with enough bread for a few days. After that, she shrugged. You know the rest. Cole stood too, his mind working through the information. We need to contact the authorities. File a report. To say what? That I'm being persecuted by my loving nephew who only wants to care for me in my dotage? That I'm so senile I wandered away from my caretakers? Margaret touched his arm. Cole, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but there's no legal recourse here. I signed the papers. I was declared incompetent by a licensed physician. In the eyes of the law, Thomas Doyle is a dutiful nephew caring for a confused old woman. I'm just the confused old woman. I don't accept that. You don't have to accept it, but you do have to understand it. She squeezed his arm gently. What you've already given me, safety, kindness, a warm place to sleep, that's more than I had any right to expect, more than I can ever repay. Don't risk your own peace trying to fix what can't be fixed. But Cole saw something in her eyes that contradicted her words, a glint of determination, of plans being made. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking, Margaret said slowly, that Thomas and Beatrice made one critical mistake. What's that? They assumed I'd die, either in that coach, or at the way station, or on the road to Cheyenne. They assumed I was too old, too weak, too broken to survive. Her smile was sharp. They underestimated me. So you do have a plan, the beginnings of one, but I'll need help, and time, and… She hesitated. I'll need to ask more favors of you than I have any right to. Ask. Just like that? You don't even know what I need. Cole thought of Emma's laughter returning to the house, of his mother's renewed purpose, of how the empty spaces in his life had felt less empty with this fierce old woman in his home. Just like that, he confirmed. Margaret studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded once, a decisive movement. I need to send some letters. Very carefully worded letters to people I trust, if any are still living. And I need to stay hidden here, away from Denver, away from anywhere Thomas might think to look. He doesn't know you're alive? I doubt it. The way station keeper would have had no reason to report a random old woman passing through. And if Thomas checked at all, he'd have been told I never arrived at the institution in Cheyenne. She smiled grimly. I'm a ghost, Cole, and ghosts can be very useful things. How long do you need? I don't know, months maybe. Assuming anyone I contact even believes me or is willing to help. She looked uncomfortable. I can't pay you. I have nothing. But if this works, if I can reclaim even a portion of what was taken, I swear to you I'll make it right. I told you before, I don't want payment. And I'm telling you now that you'll have it anyway if I have anything to say about it. Margaret's voice was firm. What Thomas and Beatrice did was wrong, and wrong should be answered. Not for revenge, though Lord knows I'd be lying if I said I didn't want a little of that, but because what's right is right. Cole extended his hand. Then we have an agreement. You can stay as long as you need. Send your letters. Make your plans. We'll help however we can. Margaret took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You're a good man, Cole Barrett. Too good for this world, maybe. Just a man who believes in doing what's right. That's what makes you rare. The next morning, Margaret began writing letters. Martha provided paper and ink, and Margaret worked at the kitchen table, her handwriting elegant despite the slight tremor in her fingers. She wrote carefully, crossing out words, starting over, each letter taking hours to compose. Who are you writing to? Emma asked, watching over Margaret's shoulder. Old friends, people I knew before. Margaret trailed off. People I hope remember me kindly. Will they help? I don't know, sweetheart, but we have to try. Cole took the first batch of letters into town himself, posting them from the general store. The postmaster, a gossipy man named Henderson, eyed the Denver addresses curiously. Got business in the city, Cole? Just helping out a friend. What friend? Didn't know you knew anyone in Denver. Cole just smiled and left, aware that small-town curiosity was its own kind of danger. If word got back to Thomas Doyle that someone in Sweetwater was sending letters to his aunt's old acquaintances, it could alert him that Margaret was alive. He returned home to find Margaret teaching Emma how to embroider. The two heads, one silver and one blonde, bent over the fabric together, and Cole felt that tightness in his chest again, the sensation of something long frozen beginning to thaw. "Daddy, look!" Emma held up her work. "It's a flower. Miss Margaret showed me how to make the petals." "That's real pretty little bit." "She's a natural," Margaret said warmly. "Her stitches are more even than mine were at twice her age." Emma beamed. That night, Martha pulled Cole aside while they were washing dishes. "She's planning something." "I know. Something dangerous, maybe." "Maybe." Martha was quiet for a moment, her hands still in the soapy water. "Your father would have helped her, no matter the risk." "I know that too." "So you're going to see this through, whatever it is?" Cole dried a plate slowly. "She was left to die in a creek, Ma, by her own family, for money. If there's a chance to make that right, then we help," Martha finished, "even if it brings trouble to our door." "Even then," Martha nodded. "Good. Just wanted to make sure we were all understanding the stakes." But as October turned to November and the first snow began to fall on the Wyoming plains, Cole couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were higher than any of them realized. Margaret's letters had gone out, but there had been no responses yet. And winter was closing in, isolating the ranch, making travel difficult. They were committed now, for better or worse. Margaret Doyle had brought more than just herself into their home. She'd brought secrets, plans, and the promise of a reckoning. Cole just hoped they were all ready for what came next. The first response arrived 3 weeks later, delivered by the same gossipy postmaster who couldn't quite hide his curiosity about why Cole Barrett was suddenly receiving correspondence from a law firm in Laramie. Cole tucked the envelope inside his coat without opening it, thanked Henderson with a tight smile, and rode back to the ranch through a light snowfall that was turning the world white and silent. Margaret was in the kitchen when he returned, rolling out dough for biscuits while Emma carefully cut shapes with a tin cup. Her hand stilled when she saw the envelope in Cole's hand, flour dusting her fingers as she reached for it. "It's from Jonathan Walsh," she said quietly, studying the return address. "He was James's attorney, helped us draft our wills, manage some of the property transfers." Her voice wavered. "I wasn't sure he'd even remember me." "Only one way to find out." Cole nodded towards the envelope. Margaret's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Emma watched with wide eyes, sensing the importance of the moment, even if she didn't fully understand it. Martha emerged from the pantry, wiping her hands on her apron, and stood silent vigil as Margaret unfolded the single sheet of paper. She read it once, then again, her lips moving soundlessly. Then she lowered the letter and closed her eyes. "Margaret?" Martha's voice was gentle. "He remembers." Margaret's voice cracked. "He says he was horrified when Thomas came to him 6 months ago requesting copies of James's estate documents. Said something felt wrong about it, but he had no legal grounds to refuse." She opened her eyes, and they were bright with unshed tears. "He says if I'm willing to fight, he's willing to help. Pro bono. For James's memory." Cole felt tension he hadn't known he was carrying released from his shoulders. "That's good news. It's a start." Margaret refolded the letter carefully, as if it were made of glass. "But Jonathan's practice is small. Going up against Thomas will require more than one country lawyer with good intentions. We'll need evidence, witnesses, documentation proving the conservatorship was fraudulent. Can he help with that? Perhaps. But first I need to know exactly what Thomas did with my assets. Which properties were sold, which accounts were emptied, where the money went." She pressed her fingers to her temples. "And I need to do it without alerting Thomas that I'm alive and fighting back. How?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Emma had gone back to cutting biscuit shapes, but her ears were clearly tuned to every word. Finally, Margaret said, "Jonathan can request documentation through official channels. Court records are public. Property transfers are recorded. If he's careful, he can gather information without raising suspicions about who he's gathering it for. And if Thomas asks why he's looking? Jonathan's a lawyer. He can say he's researching for another client with a similar case. Estate law, conservatorship disputes. It's common enough work. Margaret smoothed the letter against the table. It will take time. Months, probably. But it's the only way to build a case strong enough to challenge Thomas in court. Martha pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. Months of you staying here, you mean? Through the winter? I know I'm imposing. Hush. That's not what I meant. Martha's eyes were serious. I meant months of keeping you hidden. Months of lying if anyone asks who you are. Months of waiting for Thomas Doyle to realize his aunt didn't die in a ditch somewhere and come looking. The room went very quiet. Even Emma stopped her cutting. You're right, Margaret said finally. This isn't just my fight anymore. I've made it yours too. And that's not fair. I should make other arrangements. Find somewhere else to... Don't be foolish, Martha's voice was sharp. Where else would you go? Another way station? Another institution? She shook her head firmly. No. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. But we need to be smart about it. We need a story for anyone who asks questions. Cole leaned against the counter, his mind already working through the practicalities. We tell people you're Ma's cousin, widowed, no children, needed a place to stay for the winter. It's common enough. Lots of folks take in family when the weather turns. A cousin from where? Margaret asked. Somewhere far enough away that nobody here would know different. Montana, maybe? Or Nebraska? Montana, Martha decided. Billings. I can say you're my late husband's cousin on his mother's side. That explains why nobody around here would have met you before. Margaret looked between them, something shifting in her expression. You've both thought about this already. We've thought about a lot of things, Cole admitted, including what happens if Thomas Doyle shows up on our doorstep. He won't. He thinks I'm dead or as good as dead. Why would he look here? Because people talk, Martha said bluntly. Because Henderson at the post office is already curious about letters from Denver. Because a stranger showing up in a small town always causes gossip. And gossip has a way of traveling. Emma suddenly spoke up, her voice small but clear. I won't tell anyone. I'm good at keeping secrets. Margaret reached over and cupped Emma's face gently. I know you are, sweetheart, but we're not asking you to lie. We're just asking you to be careful about what you say. What's the difference? The difference, Cole said, crouching down to Emma's eye level, is that if someone asks who Miss Margaret is, you tell them she's Great Aunt Margaret from Billings. That's the truth. That's what she is now. But you don't go around volunteering information. You don't tell stories about how we found her or what she's doing here. Understand? Emma nodded solemnly. I understand, Daddy. Good girl. Cole stood and turned back to Margaret. Write to Jonathan. Tell him what you need. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Over the following weeks, Margaret and Jonathan Walsh exchanged a careful stream of letters. Each one was written in deliberately vague language, never explicitly naming Thomas or Beatrice, never detailing specific accusations. To anyone intercepting the correspondence, it would have looked like nothing more than an old woman consulting a lawyer about general estate matters. But the information Jonathan sent back was damning. He sold the Denver house for $30,000, Margaret read aloud one evening, her voice flat with fury. $30,000. James and I paid $65,000 for it in '69. It was worth at least $80,000 on today's market. Thomas practically gave it away. Cole looked up from the ledger where he was recording the month's ranch expenses. To who? One of his law partners, a man named Chester Faulkner. Margaret's hands tightened on the letter. I've met Chester. He and Thomas went to university together. This was a favor between friends, not a legitimate sale. Can Jonathan prove that? He's trying, but proving fraud requires more than just a suspiciously low sale price. We need evidence that Thomas knew he was acting against my interests, that he deliberately undervalued assets to benefit himself and his associates. Martha, mending socks by the fire, spoke without looking up. Seems to me a pattern of suspicious sales might be evidence enough. It might be if there's a pattern. Jonathan's still researching the other properties. Margaret set the letter aside and rubbed her eyes. I'm starting to think I had more assets than I even remembered. James was always making investments, buying land. I never paid much attention to the details. I trusted him to handle it. And then you trusted Thomas, Cole said quietly. Yes. And look where that got me. Emma, curled up on the sofa with a book, suddenly asked, "Why did your nephew steal from you, Miss Margaret? Didn't he love you?" The adults exchanged glances. Margaret was silent for a moment, then set down her teacup and turned to face Emma directly. "I think he might have loved me in his own way, sweetheart, but he loved money more. Some people do. They convince themselves that having more money will make them happy, make them important. And when that money is right there within reach, they find ways to justify taking it. But stealing is wrong. Yes, it is, but people are very good at telling themselves stories that make wrong things seem right. Thomas probably told himself that I was old, that I didn't need all that money, that he could manage it better than I could. He probably convinced himself he was doing me a favor. That's dumb." Margaret's laugh was genuine this time. "Yes, sweetheart, it is." As November deepened into December, Margaret became part of the household's rhythm in ways that felt almost natural. She was up early, helping Martha with breakfast despite protests about her feet, which still bothered her in cold weather. She schooled Emma in reading and arithmetic, having been well-educated herself in an era when that was rare for women. She told stories that made the long winter evenings pass faster, tales of territorial balls and railroad tycoons, and the early days of Denver, when it was barely more than a mining camp with delusions of grandeur. And slowly, carefully, she planned her revenge. More letters came from Jonathan Walsh. Thomas had sold not just the Denver house, but 3 other properties, a building that had housed a haberdashery and 2 residential lots. Total value conservatively estimated at over $100,000, all sold to associates of Thomas for a fraction of their worth. "He's liquidating everything," Margaret said, spreading the letters across the kitchen table like she was laying out cards for solitaire. "Selling properties, closing accounts, converting everything to cash. Why would he do that?" Cole studied the pattern. Maybe he's planning to leave Denver. Or planning to invest the money somewhere his aunt's name isn't attached to it, Martha suggested darkly. If you were declared incompetent, but you came back and were declared competent again, he'd have to return everything. But if the money's been moved, invested in things under his name, it's much harder to recover. Margaret's face was pale. "He's not just stealing from me. He's erasing me entirely." The realization settled over the room like a shroud. This wasn't just about greed or opportunity. Thomas Doyle was systematically dismantling his aunt's entire existence, converting her lifetime of assets into untraceable wealth. "We need to move faster," Cole said. "We can't. Jonathan needs time to gather documentation, to build the case properly. If we rush this, if we confront Thomas before we have ironclad proof, he'll destroy whatever evidence remains. And if we wait too long, there won't be anything left to recover." Margaret met his eyes. "I know. Believe me, I know." That night, Cole couldn't sleep. He stood on the porch in the bitter cold, watching snow fall in the darkness and thinking about how complicated his simple ranching life had become. 3 months ago, his biggest concerns were whether the cattle would make it through winter and if Emma's cough was going to turn into something serious. Now he was harboring a fugitive because that's what Margaret essentially was, hiding from family who believed she was dead and helping plan what amounted to a legal war against a powerful Denver attorney. The door opened behind him. Margaret emerged, wrapped in one of Martha's heavy shawls. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Too much thinking." "I'm sorry, Cole. I've brought nothing but trouble to your door." "Stop apologizing." "I can't help it. Every time I see you standing out here looking worried, every time I watch Martha count the household money and know I'm an extra mouth to feed, every time Emma asks innocent questions that require careful answers." "Margaret," Cole turned to face her. "Stop." She fell silent, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "You want to know what I think about when I can't sleep?" Cole asked. "I think about Emma laughing, really laughing, not the sad little ghost laugh she's had since her mother died. I think about my mother having purpose again, teaching someone, caring for someone. I think about this house feeling like a home instead of just a place we all sleep." "Cole, I'm not finished." His voice was firm but gentle. "You think you've brought trouble. Maybe you have. But you've also brought life. And I'll take complicated and alive over simple and dead any day." Margaret's eyes glistened in the dim light from the window. "You're a rare man, Cole Barrett. So you keep saying, I'm starting to think you have a limited vocabulary." She laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise her. "Perhaps I do." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the snow. Then Margaret said, "Jonathan sent something else in his last letter, something I didn't share with everyone." "What?" "He found the doctor who signed my incompetence declaration. Dr. Harrison Finch." Jonathan made some inquiries, discreet ones. Turns out Dr. Finch is known in Denver legal circles as someone who will sign anything for the right price. Cole felt his jaw tighten. So the examination was a fraud. Almost certainly, but proving it is another matter. Finch will claim he performed a thorough evaluation. It'll be his professional opinion against my word. And whose word carries more weight? A respected physician or an elderly woman with a financial interest in being declared competent? There has to be a way. Jonathan thinks if we can find other people Finch has falsely declared incompetent, if we can establish a pattern of paid declarations, we might be able to discredit him entirely. But that means finding those people, finding their families, convincing them to come forward. She pulled the shawl tighter. It means months more work, maybe a year. Then that's what we do. Cole, I can't ask you to... Shh, you're not asking. I'm offering. He looked at her directly. See this through. Build your case. Take back what's yours. We'll be here as long as you need. Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she said very softly, "Why? Why do you care this much about a stranger's problems?" Cole thought about how to answer that. He thought about his father, who died helping a neighbor. About his wife, who'd believed in kindness even when kindness cost her. About the kind of world he wanted Emma to grow up in. "Because it's right," he said finally. "And because someone has to care. Might as well be me." Christmas came to the Barrett Ranch with fresh snow and the smell of pine. Martha insisted on decorating despite the hardships, stringing popcorn and cutting paper snowflakes with Emma, while Margaret told stories about Christmases in the old days, when Denver was young and wild. "James once bought me a piano for Christmas," Margaret said, her voice wistful. "Had it shipped all the way from St. Louis. It took 3 months to arrive, and when it did, half the keys were out of tune from the journey. But he was so proud of himself, standing there in the parlor while the delivery men wrestled it through the door." "Do you play?" Emma asked. "I did once. Haven't touched a piano in years, though. After James died, I couldn't bring myself to play anymore. Every song reminded me of him." "That's sad." "Yes," Margaret agreed. "But it's also beautiful in a way. To love someone so much that music itself becomes a memorial." On Christmas morning, Emma discovered a carefully wrapped package under the small tree Cole had cut from the property. Inside was a doll with a hand-sewn dress of blue calico, its face delicately embroidered with black thread. "Miss Margaret made it," Emma breathed, holding the doll like it was made of glass. "Didn't you? I recognized the stitching." Margaret's cheeks flushed. "I had some time in the evenings, and Martha had fabric scraps." Emma threw her arms around Margaret's neck so suddenly that the older woman gasped. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. She's perfect." Cole caught his mother's eye across the room and saw his own emotions reflected there. Gratitude, warmth, and the sharp awareness that this Christmas would have been desperately sad without Margaret's presence. His own gift to Margaret was simpler, a pair of sturdy boots carefully fitted to account for her scarred feet. She held them wordlessly, tears streaming down her face. "Can't have you walking around in borrowed slippers all winter," Cole said gruffly, uncomfortable with her emotion. "They're perfect," Margaret whispered. "Thank you." But the peaceful holiday was broken 2 days later when Henderson, the postmaster, rode out to the ranch personally, the first time Cole could ever remember that happening. The man sat his horse in the yard, looking uncomfortable and cold. "Got a letter for Mrs. Margaret Doyle," Henderson called out. "Figured it must be important. Coming express like it did. Thought I'd write it out personal." Cole came out onto the porch, his heart sinking. Express mail was expensive. Nobody sent express unless it was urgent. "I'll take it," Cole said, walking down to take the envelope from Henderson's gloved hand. "She a relative of yours, this Mrs. Doyle?" Henderson's eyes were bright with curiosity. "Family friend, cousin of my mother's from Montana." "Montana." Henderson drew out the word. "Funny, This letter's from Denver. Lots of folks got connections in lots of places. Cole kept his voice easy, friendly. Thanks for bringing it out. Saved me a trip to town. Henderson clearly wanted to linger, to fish for more information, but the cold was biting and Cole wasn't offering an invitation inside. Finally, the postmaster tipped his hat and turned his horse back toward town. Cole waited until he was out of sight before going back inside. The envelope was addressed in unfamiliar handwriting, and when Margaret saw it, the color drained from her face. That's Beatrice's writing. Your niece? Yes. Margaret took the letter with trembling hands. Why would she? Open it, Martha urged. Margaret broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. As she read, her face went from pale to ashen. What is it? Cole demanded. Margaret's voice was hollow. It's addressed to whoever is caring for Mrs. Margaret Doyle. Beatrice says she's heard rumors that I might still be alive, that I might have found help. She says if I am alive, I should know that Thomas is very ill, that he's asking for me, that he wants to— Her voice broke. That he wants to make amends before he dies. It's a trick, Martha said immediately. Of course it's a trick. Thomas isn't dying. He's 35 years old and healthy as a horse. Margaret crumpled the letter in her fist. But how did Beatrice know to send this here? How did she know I was alive at all? Cole's mind raced. The letter's to Jonathan. If Thomas suspected something, he could have had someone watching Jonathan's practice, seen the correspondence, made the connection. But the letters never mentioned where I was staying. We were so careful. Express mail leaves a trail. Henderson just told me himself that he wrote it out personal. If someone asked, if someone paid enough, he'd probably tell them exactly where Margaret Doyle is staying. Cole cursed under his breath. They know you're here. Maybe not the details, but they know enough. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Their careful secrecy, their months of planning, potentially undone by a gossipy postmaster, and an express letter designed to draw Margaret out. I won't go, Margaret said firmly. I won't fall for such an obvious manipulation. You don't have to go to Denver, Cole said slowly, but they might come here. Let them come. I have nothing more to say to Thomas and Beatrice. Margaret, Martha said gently, if they come here, if they make a scene, if they tell everyone you're mentally incompetent and they're your legal guardians, then we fight them. Jonathan is building a case that takes time. Time we might not have anymore. Cole paced to the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard. If Thomas shows up here with legal documents declaring him your conservator, with a doctor's statement saying you're not of sound mind, what do you think the local sheriff will do? Margaret's face hardened. Take their side. Because Thomas is a respectable lawyer and I'm a confused old woman who wandered away from her caretakers. Exactly. Emma, who'd been silent in the corner with her new doll, suddenly spoke up. We could hide her. What, sweetheart? Martha turned to her granddaughter. We could hide Miss Margaret, like in the stories she tells about people hiding during the wars. We could hide her somewhere they wouldn't look. Emma, this isn't a game, Cole began. But she's right, Margaret interrupted. Not about hiding in the house, that would never work, but about not being here at all. She looked at Cole. If I'm not here when Thomas arrives, if there's no evidence I was ever here, what can he do? Where would you go? Into town. That's the first place he'd look. Not town, somewhere more remote, somewhere I could stay for a few weeks while this blows over. Margaret's mind was clearly working. You have line shacks, don't you? Shelters for when you're working distant parts of the ranch? Margaret, it's December. Those shacks aren't meant for winter living. They're barely more than 4 walls and a stove. But they exist, and they're on your property, which means Thomas would need permission to search them. Permission you don't have to give. Cole looked at his mother. Martha's face was troubled but thoughtful. She has a point, Martha said reluctantly. If Margaret's not here, if we claim we sent her back to Montana before the weather got too bad, what proof does Thomas have otherwise? Some letters postmarked from Sweetwater could have been written anywhere. You want me to put a 70-year-old woman in a line shack in the middle of winter? I want us to have options, Martha replied. And right now, staying here and hoping Thomas doesn't come looking seems like the worst option of all. Margaret stood, her new boots solid beneath her feet. I've survived worse than a cold shack. I survived 6 days walking through wilderness. I survived being left to die in a creek. I can survive a few weeks of discomfort. This is madness, Cole said, but he was already thinking through logistics. The North Line shack was the most remote, a solid day's ride in summer, longer in snow. But it had a good stove, thick walls, and a root cellar that stayed insulated even in the coldest weather, if they stocked it properly. How long would I need to stay? Margaret asked. Until Jonathan finishes building the case. Until we have enough evidence to confront Thomas in court and win. Cole ran calculations in his head. Could be a month? Could be 3. Then 3 months it is. Miss Margaret, no! Emma's voice was anguished. You can't leave! Margaret knelt, carefully, her feet still tender, and took Emma's hands. I'm not leaving, sweetheart. I'm just going away for a little while, so that when I come back I can stay forever. You understand? No. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I don't want you to go. Please don't go. Oh, my darling girl. Margaret pulled Emma into a hug. I don't want to go either, but sometimes we have to do hard things to make everything right again. Cole watched his daughter cry into Margaret's shoulder and felt fury building in his chest. Fury at Thomas Doyle for his greed, at Beatrice for her manipulation, at a world where an old woman had to hide in the wilderness to reclaim what was rightfully hers. We'll need supplies, he said quietly. Food, blankets, firewood, medical supplies in case something happens, and we'll need to move fast before anyone else comes nosing around. How long to prepare? Margaret asked. 2 days. Maybe 3 if the weather holds. Then we have 3 days to say goodbye. Margaret looked around the warm kitchen, at the Christmas decorations still hanging, at the family that had become hers. Let's make them count. Those 3 days passed like sand through fingers. Cole worked from dawn until well past dark, preparing the North Line shack for occupancy that it was never designed for. He hauled load after load of firewood, stacking it inside until the small structure was half full of split logs. He checked every inch of the roof for leaks, stuffed rags into gaps in the wall chinking, and reinforced the door against Wyoming wind that could blow strong enough to tear weak things apart. Martha packed supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd survived hard winters before. Dried beef, beans, flour, salt, coffee, honey, cornmeal, preserved vegetables from the root cellar. She wrapped everything in oilcloth and packed it in wooden crates that would keep out mice and moisture. Blankets, 2 of their warmest quilts, extra clothing, needles and thread, matches wrapped in wax paper, candles, lamp oil, soap, and a precious bottle of laudanum in case Margaret's feet troubled her badly. It's too much, Margaret protested, watching the supplies pile up. You'll beggar yourselves. We'll manage, Martha said firmly. You just focus on staying alive out there. Emma followed Margaret everywhere during those final days, silent and pale. She helped Margaret pack her few belongings, sat beside her during meals, and crawled into her lap at every opportunity as if trying to memorize the feeling of being held. Will you write to me? Emma asked on the second evening. I can't, sweetheart. Letters would give away where I am. Then how will I know you're all right? Margaret stroked Emma's hair. Your daddy will ride out to check on me. He can bring back messages. And when this is all over, when I come home, I'll tell you stories about my grand winter adventure. Would you like that? Emma nodded against Margaret's chest, but her tears soaked through the fabric of Margaret's dress. On the 3rd morning, Cole woke before dawn to find fresh snow falling. Fat flakes drifted down in the darkness, already accumulating on the ground. He cursed silently. The ride to the North Shack would be difficult enough without a fresh snowfall making the trail harder to follow. We should wait, Martha said when she found him saddling 2 horses in the barn. Wait for the snow to stop. Can't. Henderson's probably already told half the county about that express letter. Every day we delay is another day for Thomas to show up. Cole cinched the saddle tight. We go now. Margaret emerged from the house wrapped in layers of clothing that made her look twice her size. Martha had given her a man's coat, thick wool pants under her skirt, and a fur hat that had belonged to Cole's father. She looked small and impossibly fragile against the backdrop of snow and darkness. Ready? Cole asked. As I'll ever be. Emma ran out in her nightgown, bare feet in the snow, and threw herself at Margaret. Don't go. Please don't go. Please. Emma Barrett, get inside this instant before you catch your death. Martha swept her granddaughter up, but not before Emma had wrapped her arms around Margaret's waist in a grip that took two adults to gently pry loose. "I'll come back," Margaret promised, her own voice thick with tears. "I swear to you, Emma, I'll come back." The ride north was brutal. The snow fell heavier as they climbed into the higher elevations, and the wind picked up until it howled through the pines like something alive and angry. Cole led Margaret's horse by a rope, not trusting her limited riding skills in these conditions. She sat hunched in the saddle, face buried in the collar of her coat, saying nothing. They stopped twice to rest the horses, and once when Cole thought he heard riders behind them. But it was only the wind playing tricks, and after 15 minutes of tense listening, they moved on. The line shack appeared through the snow like a ghost materializing, a small square structure of weathered logs with a stone chimney and a single window. Cole had been here 4 days ago with the last load of supplies, but already the snow had drifted against the door. "Stay mounted," he told Margaret, dismounting to kick the snow away. The door protested, but finally swung inward, revealing the dark interior. Cole lit a lantern and surveyed his work. The stacks of firewood, the crates of supplies, the bed he'd built up with extra blankets and the 2 quilts. It looked better than he'd feared, but worse than he'd hoped. This was no place for an elderly woman to spend the winter. "It's perfect," Margaret said from the doorway, as if reading his thoughts. "It's a shack. It's a fortress, a hiding place, a chance." She stepped inside, her new boots crunching on the rough floorboards. "This is more than Thomas and Beatrice left me with." Cole showed her everything: how to work the stove, where the food was stored, how to prime the pump for the small well just outside. He demonstrated how to bar the door from inside and made her practice it until she could do it smoothly. "I'll come back in 1 week," he said. "Bring fresh supplies, check that you're all right. If the weather's bad, it might be 10 days, but I will come. You understand?" "I understand." "And if something happens, if you get sick or hurt or scared, there's a rifle in the corner. Fire 3 shots. I'll hear them if I'm anywhere near the property." "Cole," Margaret touched his arm, "I've survived worse than loneliness and cold. I'll be fine." "You shouldn't have to just survive." "No," she agreed quietly, "but sometimes survival is the best we can do." Cole built up the fire until the small room was warm, then lingered by the door, reluctant to leave. Margaret had already begun unpacking supplies, moving around the small space with the careful efficiency of someone making a new place home. "Jonathan will keep building the case," Cole said. "We'll have everything ready for when you come back." "I know. And if Thomas does show up at the ranch, we'll tell him exactly what we agreed. That you stayed with us for a few weeks, then went back to Montana. That we don't know where you are now." "Cole," Margaret turned to face him fully, "I trust you. Now go, before the snow gets worse, and give Emma a hug from me." The ride back was even harder, riding into the wind instead of with it. Cole arrived at the ranch well after dark, half frozen and exhausted. Martha met him at the door with hot coffee and worried eyes. "She settled?" "As settled as anyone can be in a line shack in December." "This is madness." "I know." Cole wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, trying to thaw his fingers. "But what choice do we have?" Emma appeared at the top of the stairs in her nightgown. "Is Miss Margaret safe?" "Yes, little bit. She's safe and warm, and she sent you a hug." Emma descended the stairs slowly and climbed into Cole's lap, something she hadn't done in months. She was getting too big for it, all long limbs and sharp elbows, but Cole held her anyway. "I miss her already," Emma whispered. "I know. I do too." 3 days later, Thomas Doyle arrived. Cole was in the barn when he heard the horses. 2 riders, approaching fast. He emerged to find a tall man in an expensive coat dismounting in the yard, followed by a severe-looking woman in dark traveling clothes. "Can I help you?" Cole called, keeping his voice neutral. The man turned, and Cole saw a face that was handsome in a cold way. Sharp features, calculating eyes, a smile that never reached above his mouth. "I'm looking for Cole Barrett." "You found him." "Thomas Doyle." He didn't offer to shake hands. "This is my sister Beatrice. We're here about our aunt." "Don't know anyone named Doyle except the 2 of you, and we just met." Thomas's smile thinned. "Don't play games, Mr. Barrett. We know she's here." "We received correspondence postmarked from this area. Express mail was delivered to a Mrs. Margaret Doyle at this address." Express mail was delivered here, that's true, for an old woman named Margaret who was staying with my mother for a few weeks. Where is she now? Gone back to Montana, far as I know. Weather started turning bad and she wanted to get home before the passes closed. Beatrice spoke for the first time, her voice sharp. That's a lie. Beg your pardon? Our aunt is mentally incompetent. She has no home in Montana. She wandered away from her caretakers and ended up here somehow. Beatrice pulled a folded document from her coat. We are her legal conservators, responsible for her well-being and safety. You're harboring a vulnerable woman who needs medical care. Cole glanced at the document without taking it. Like I said, the woman who stayed here went back to Montana. If that's not your aunt, then I can't help you. Thomas stepped closer, his eyes hard. Mr. Barrett, I'm an attorney. I know when someone is lying to me. You received multiple letters from my aunt over the course of several weeks. You posted replies. Henderson at the post office confirmed it. Henderson talks too much. Where is she? Not here. Thomas looked past Cole toward the house. Martha stood on the porch, arms crossed. Emma peeked out from behind her grandmother's skirts. May we search your home? Thomas asked, though it wasn't really a question. No. We have legal authority. You have a piece of paper that might mean something in Denver. Out here, you're just trespassing on my property. Cole's voice hardened. And I'm asking you politely to leave. Beatrice's face flushed with anger. This is obstruction. We could go to the sheriff. Have you arrested for interfering with a conservatorship? Feel free. Sheriff Daniels is in town. I'm sure he'd love to hear about how 2 people from Denver showed up demanding to search a Wyoming rancher's home without cause. Without cause? Thomas's voice rose. We have documentation that our aunt... You have documentation about your aunt. You don't have any proof that the woman who stayed here was your aunt. For all you know, it was my mother's cousin from Billings, exactly like I said. Brother and sister exchanged glances. Thomas pulled out a photograph. This is Margaret Doyle. Is this the woman who stayed here? Cole looked at the photograph. It showed a woman much younger than the Margaret he knew, standing beside a portly man in front of an impressive house. But the eyes were the same and the set of the jaw. Can't say for certain. Might be. Woman I met was older, thinner. Hard times will change a face. He handed back the photograph. But like I said, she's gone now. Left 3 weeks back, right after the first big snow. It was a gamble, claiming she'd left before the express letter arrived. But Cole was betting these 2 hadn't paid close enough attention to dates. Thomas's jaw clenched. If we find out you're lying, then you'll what? I'm not lying. There was an old woman here. She left. That's the truth. Cole crossed his arms. Now, unless you've got actual legal business with me, I'd appreciate you leaving my property. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Beatrice touched her brother's arm. Thomas, let's go to town. Talk to the sheriff. If he's hiding her, we'll find out. Thomas stared at Cole with undisguised hatred. This isn't over. Never thought it was. They remounted and rode toward Sweetwater, their horses kicking up snow. Cole watched until they disappeared from sight, then let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Martha came down from the porch. That was dangerous. Had to be done. What if they come back with the sheriff? Then we tell the same story. An old woman stayed here, left weeks ago. We don't know where she is now. Cole turned to his mother. It's the truth. We don't know exactly where Margaret is. We know there's a line shack on the north property, but that's all. You're splitting hairs. I'm protecting a woman who was left to die in a creek. If that requires splitting hairs, I'll split them as fine as they need to be. Emma emerged fully from the house. Daddy, those people were scary. I know, baby. Are they going to take Miss Margaret away? Cole knelt down to Emma's level. They're going to try, but we're not going to let them. Understand? Emma nodded, but her eyes were still frightened. True to Beatrice's word, Thomas and the sheriff appeared at the ranch 2 hours later. Sheriff Daniels was a practical man in his 50s who'd known the Barrett family for 20 years. He looked uncomfortable with his mission. Cole, these folks say you're hiding their aunt. That true? No, sir. They've got legal papers saying they're conservators. Say the woman is incompetent, needs their care. I'm sure they do have papers, but the woman who stayed here left weeks ago. I've got no idea where she is now. Daniel studied Cole's face. Mind if I look around? Just to satisfy these folks that she's not here? Not at all. House, barn, anywhere you want. Thomas looked triumphant as Daniels conducted a thorough search. He checked every room, every outbuilding, even looked in the root cellar. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. "She's not here," Daniels announced when he emerged from the barn. Satisfied? "She was here," Thomas insisted. "She has to be somewhere on this property." "This property is near 3,000 acres, Cole said mildly. "You're welcome to search all of it if you think that'll help." Daniels gave Cole a sharp look but said nothing. He turned to Thomas. "Mr. Doyle, I've searched the residence. There's no elderly woman here. If she was here before and left, that's not a crime." "He's lying. He knows where she is." "Can you prove that?" Thomas's silence was answer enough. "Then I think we're done here." Daniels tipped his hat to Martha. "Sorry for the trouble, ma'am." After they left, Daniels lingered. Cole walked him to his horse. "Want to tell me what's really going on?" Daniels asked quietly. "Not particularly. Cole, I've known you since you were 10 years old. You're not a liar by nature. Which means if you're lying now, you've got a damn good reason." "I'm not lying. There's no woman in my house." Daniels swung into the saddle. "That's a careful answer. Not lying, but not telling the whole truth either." He looked down at Cole with serious eyes. "Those two from Denver aren't going to give up. They've got money and connections. If you're protecting someone, you better make damn sure your story holds up." "It'll hold up." "I hope so, because if it doesn't, I'll have to come back, and next time it won't be a friendly search." Cole watched the sheriff ride away, then returned to the house where Martha was heating soup for lunch. "We need to get word to Margaret," Martha said. "Let her know they came looking." "Can't risk it. If Thomas is watching the property, if he sees me ride out toward the North Range, he'll know something's up." "So we just leave her up there not knowing they're hunting for her?" "She knows they're hunting. That's why she's hiding." Cole poured coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "We stick to the plan. I check on her in 4 more days, bring supplies, tell her what happened. Until then, she stays hidden. And if Thomas comes back before then? Then we tell the same story, over and over until he believes it or gives up." But Thomas Doyle didn't give up. Over the next week, he and Beatrice became fixtures in Sweetwater, asking questions, showing Margaret's photograph, offering money for information. They took rooms at the boarding house and made it clear they weren't leaving until they found their aunt. Henderson, the postmaster, proved particularly helpful to them, detailing every letter that had passed between the Barrett Ranch and Denver. Thomas took notes, building a timeline, looking for gaps and inconsistencies. "He's like a dog with a bone," Martha said after Cole returned from town with the week's supplies. "Mrs. Henderson says he's been at the post office 3 times, going through records." "Let him. All he'll find is that letters were sent and received. Can't prove who wrote them or where they were written from." He's also been asking about the ranch, how big it is, how many buildings, whether you have line shacks on the property. Cole's jaw tightened. "Who told him that?" "Half the men in town, probably. It's not a secret that ranchers use line shacks." Martha set down the potato she was peeling. "Cole, if he organizes a search party, he won't. Not without the sheriff's approval, and Daniel's already searched the house. He's not going to waste time combing 3,000 acres in winter on Thomas Doyle's say-so." "But Thomas might do it himself." "Let him try. He's a city lawyer who probably hasn't ridden more than 5 miles from a coach house in his life. He'll freeze or get lost before he finds anything." Still, Cole moved up his timeline. 3 days after Thomas arrived in Sweetwater, Cole loaded a pack horse with supplies and set out before dawn, taking a roundabout route that added hours to the journey but made it harder for anyone to follow. The Northline shack looked exactly as he'd left it, smoke rising from the chimney. Cole felt relief wash through him as he dismounted and knocked. "Margaret, it's Cole." The door opened immediately. Margaret stood there, thinner than before, her eyes hollow with solitude. "Thank heavens. I was starting to think something had happened. Thomas came to the ranch. Him and his sister." Her face went pale. "Did they—" "We sent them away. Told them you'd left weeks ago, gone back to Montana. They got the sheriff to search the house, but of course they found nothing." Cole carried supplies inside while Margaret heated coffee. "They're not giving up, though. They've taken rooms in town, asking questions. How long can we keep this up?" "As long as we need to." Cole unpacked flour, beans, fresh eggs packed in sawdust. Jonathan sent a letter to the house. He's found 2 other people Dr. Finch declared incompetent under suspicious circumstances. He's trying to convince them to testify. That's good. That's... Margaret's voice cracked. That's very good. Cole looked at her properly for the first time. Her hands trembled as she poured coffee. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she moved like someone who hadn't slept well in days. "How are you managing?" he asked gently. "I'm fine. It's quiet, but I'm fine." "Margaret?" She set down the coffee pot. "It's hard. Harder than I thought. The days are long, and the nights are longer. I talk to myself just to hear a human voice. I count the logs in the walls, the knots in the wood. I've read the 2 books you brought 17 times each." Her voice shook. "But I'm managing. I'm surviving. That's what matters." Cole pulled out a bundle from his coat. "Emma sent you something." Inside were drawings, crude 6-year-old renderings of the ranch, of horses, of a stick-figure woman with silver hair. And at the bottom of the pile, a carefully folded letter, written in Emma's uncertain hand. "Dear Miss Margaret," it read, "I miss you very much. Daddy says you are being brave. I am trying to be brave too, but it is hard. Please come home soon. I love you. Emma." Margaret pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "That child, that precious child. She asks about you every day, wants to know when you're coming home. Tell her soon. Tell her as soon as I can." Cole stayed for 2 hours, chopping fresh firewood, checking the roof, making sure the stove was drawing properly. He brought news from town, told her about Thomas's search, about the questions being asked. "He's not going to find you," Cole assured her. "Even if he searches, even if he somehow makes it out here, this is just one of 4 line shacks on the property. And you've got warning now. You can hide or move to one of the others." "I won't run anymore." Margaret's voice was firm. "If Thomas finds me, I'll face him, but on my terms, when I'm ready, not before." As Cole prepared to leave, Margaret caught his arm. "Thank you for everything you're risking, everything you've already done. We're family now. That's what family does. We're not blood. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. Loyalty does. You're as much family to us as anyone who shares our name." Margaret's eyes filled with fresh tears. "When this is over, when I have my life back, I'm going to make sure you never regret helping me. I don't regret it now." The ride back was contemplative. Cole thought about Thomas in his boarding house room, plotting and planning. About Margaret alone in the line shack, counting logs and rereading Emma's letter. About the precarious balance they were all maintaining and how easily it could collapse. He arrived home to find Martha agitated. "Thomas was here again. Came while you were gone." "What did he want?" "Asked where you'd gone. I told him you were working the south fence line. He didn't believe me." "He doesn't have to believe. He just has to prove otherwise, and he can't. Cole, he's hired men. Henderson's nephew and 2 others. Says he's organizing a search of the property. He can't do that without permission. He's claiming he has legal right under the conservatorship to search for his incompetent aunt anywhere she might reasonably be." Cole swore. "Did you send word to Daniels?" "Already did. He's not happy about it, but Thomas showed him some legal precedent. Daniels says if Thomas can get a judge to sign off on it, there's not much he can do to stop it. The nearest judge is in Laramie. That's 2 days' ride in good weather, longer in this snow. Thomas left this morning. Cole did the math. 4 days minimum for Thomas to reach Laramie, convince a judge, and return. Maybe 5 or 6 with the weather. That gave them less than a week. We need to move Margaret, Cole said. Where? If he's searching all 4 line shacks, not to another shack, somewhere else entirely. Cole's mind raced. Somewhere Thomas would never think to look because it's right under his nose. Martha's eyes widened. Cole Barrett, you are not suggesting what I think you're suggesting. Why not? He's already searched the house. He's got no reason to search it again. Because it's insane. It's perfect. Margaret stays in the line shack until Thomas leaves for Laramie. Then we bring her back here, hide her in the house. When Thomas returns with his search warrant or whatever he gets, he searches the line shacks and finds nothing. He gives up and goes back to Denver. And if he wants to search the house again? We've already submitted to one search. Daniels won't make us do it twice without concrete evidence. Thomas showing up empty-handed from the line shacks isn't evidence. Martha was quiet for a long moment, then she sighed. Your father would have loved this. He always did enjoy a good scheme. Is that a yes? That's a, we're all going to end up in jail, but at least we'll be together. Emma, who'd been listening from the stairs, spoke up. Does this mean Miss Margaret is coming home? For a little while, yes. Cole looked at his daughter. But it has to be secret. Very, very secret. Can you do that? Emma nodded solemnly. I won't tell anyone. I promise. 2 days later, Cole rode out to the line shack again. This time he told Henderson at the post office exactly where he was going, to check the north line before the next storm hit. If anyone asked, and he was sure Thomas's hired men would ask, Henderson would tell them Cole had gone north to work, which was exactly what Cole wanted them to think. Margaret was packed and ready when he arrived, having somehow sensed that things were coming to a head. Thomas went to Laramie for a search warrant, Cole explained. When he gets back, he's going to tear this property apart looking for you. So I moved to another shack? So you come home, back to the ranch house, hide in plain sight. Margaret stared at him. That's the most ridiculous plan I've ever heard. Which is why it'll work. They made the ride in tense silence, taking the same roundabout route Cole had used before. Margaret was a better rider now than when they'd first made the journey, but she was also weaker from weeks of isolation and inadequate food. They had to stop 3 times to let her rest. Almost there, Cole encouraged as the ranch house came into view through the trees. And there, standing on the porch talking to Martha, was Sheriff Daniels. Cole's heart stopped. Had Thomas come back early? Had they been betrayed? But as they drew closer, Daniels turned and his expression was troubled, not accusatory. Cole, he called, need a word. Cole helped Margaret down from her horse, shielding her with his body as much as possible. What can I do for you, Sheriff? Daniel's eyes flicked to Margaret, widened slightly, then returned to Cole. Inside, all of us. They gathered in the kitchen, Margaret sinking into a chair with visible relief while Martha poured coffee no one touched. I know what you're doing, Daniel said without preamble, and I'm here to tell you it's about to blow up in your face. Cole's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the wall, but Daniels raised a palm in a calming gesture. Easy. I'm not here to arrest anyone, not yet anyway. The sheriff pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. But you need to understand what's coming. Thomas Doyle didn't just go to Laramie for a search warrant. He went to file formal charges. Charges? Martha's voice was sharp. Against who? Against Cole. Against this household. Obstruction of justice, interference with illegal conservatorship, possibly kidnapping if he can convince the judge that Mrs. Doyle here is incompetent and being held against her will. Margaret's face went white. I'm not being held. I came here of my own free will. I'm hiding because my nephew stole everything I own and left me to die. I believe you, ma'am. Daniels looked at her with sympathy. But believing you and proving it in court are 2 different things. Thomas has legal documents, a doctor's statement, property transfers that look legitimate on paper. What do you have? The truth. Truth without evidence is just a story. Daniels accepted the coffee Martha pushed toward him. Thomas is smart. He's been building a case since the moment he arrived in Sweetwater. He's got Henderson's testimony about the letters. He's got witnesses who'll say Cole acted suspiciously, made a long ride north right after Thomas started asking questions. He's probably got a tracker following Cole's trail as we speak. Let them follow it. They'll find an empty line shack. Cole's jaw was set. That's not proof of anything. It's proof you lied about where she was. Proof you've been hiding her. And once he establishes you lied about that, every other thing you've said comes into question. Daniels took a long drink of coffee. The judge in Laramie is a friend of mine. He sent word ahead that Thomas made a compelling case. Says he's inclined to grant the warrant and order Mrs. Doyle turned over to her conservators pending a competency hearing. I won't go. Margaret's voice was firm despite the tremor in her hands. I won't let them take me. You might not have a choice, ma'am. If the judge orders it, then the judge is wrong. Margaret stood, drawing herself up to her full height. She looked small and frail in her borrowed clothes, but her eyes blazed with fury. I am not incompetent. I am not confused. I know exactly what Thomas and Beatrice did, and I know exactly what I'm doing now. I'm fighting back. And no piece of paper signed by a corrupt doctor and a greedy nephew is going to change that. Daniels studied her face. You make a good case, ma'am, but you're going to need to make it in front of a judge, not just me. That's exactly what we're preparing to do, Cole said. We've got a lawyer in Laramie building a case, Jonathan Walsh. He's gathering evidence, finding witnesses who can prove the conservatorship was fraudulent. How long until he's ready? Weeks, maybe a month. You don't have a month. Thomas will be back in 3 days, 4 at most, with legal authority to search this property and take Mrs. Doyle into custody. Daniel set down his cup. Which brings me to why I'm really here. I can't protect you from a court order, but I can buy you time. How? Martha asked. By not being available when Thomas gets back. I've got business in the Northern Territories. Legitimate business checking on some squatters causing trouble. Takes me about a week to handle it. He looked at each of them in turn. Without me here to enforce a warrant, Thomas can waive his papers all he wants. Won't do him any good. You do that? Cole's voice was rough with surprise. Risk your job for us? I'm not risking my job. I'm doing my job, which is maintaining order in this county. And I maintain that order better when I'm not helping city lawyers steal from old women. Daniel stood. But that only buys you a week. After that, I'll be back. And if Thomas has a legitimate court order, I'll have to enforce it. You understand? We understand, Margaret said quietly. And thank you, truly. After Daniels left, the kitchen fell into tense silence. Emma had appeared in the doorway at some point during the conversation, and now she ran to Margaret and wrapped her arms around the old woman's waist. I won't let them take you, Emma said fiercely. I won't. Margaret stroked her hair. Oh, my brave girl, but this isn't your fight. Yes, it is. You're my family. Daddy said so. Cole and Martha exchanged glances over the heads of the child and the old woman. They had 1 week to finish building a case, to find enough evidence to challenge Thomas in court, to prove Margaret was competent and the conservatorship was fraudulent. We need to contact Jonathan, Cole said. Tell him what's happening. See if he can accelerate things. I'll write tonight, Margaret said. Express mail, cost be damned. If we're running out of time, subtlety doesn't matter anymore. That night, Margaret wrote by lamplight while the rest of the household tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Her letter to Jonathan was urgent and detailed, outlining everything that had happened and begging him to expedite whatever evidence he'd gathered. Even if it's not complete, she wrote, even if it's not enough to win the case outright, we need something to present to a judge, something to counter Thomas's documentation. Please, Jonathan, I'm running out of time. Cole rode to town before dawn to post the letter, using the cover of darkness to avoid being seen. But when he reached the post office, he found Thomas Doyle's hired men camped outside, watching. Morning, one of them called. A rough-looking character named Pike, who Cole knew had a reputation for doing whatever paid best. Awful early for posting letters. Could say the same about watching post offices. Pike grinned without humor. Mr. Doyle pays well for keeping eyes on things. Says to pay special attention to any mail going to Laramie. Cole felt his stomach drop but kept his face neutral. Laramie's a big place. Lots of reasons to send letters there. Sure, but Mr. Doyle's particularly interested in letters to lawyers. Says anyone corresponding with lawyers might have something to hide. Cole thought fast. He couldn't mail the letter now, not with Pike watching. Thomas would intercept it, read it, know exactly what Margaret was planning. Well, good luck with your watching, Cole said, turning his horse back toward the ranch. Not posting anything? Pike called after him. Changed my mind. Forgot I needed stamps. He heard Pike's laughter follow him down the street. Back at the ranch, Cole found Margaret pacing the kitchen. He's watching the post office. Any mail to Laramie, he'll intercept it. Then we need another way to get the letter to Jonathan. I could ride there myself, 3 days if I push hard. No. Martha shook her head firmly. Thomas is watching for exactly that. You disappear for a week. He'll know something's happening, might even follow you. They stood in frustrated silence, each running through and discarding options. Finally, Emma spoke up from her spot by the fire. What about Mr. Chen? 3 adult heads turned toward her. Who's Mr. Chen? Margaret asked. He runs the mercantile, Emma explained. He goes to Laramie every month for supplies. Daddy, didn't he say he was going next week? Cole felt a surge of hope. That's right. He leaves Monday morning, back by Friday. Would he carry a letter? Martha asked. He might, if we ask him right. Cole grabbed his coat. I'm going back to town. Chen's mercantile sat on the far end of Sweetwater's main street, a tidy establishment that stocked everything from pickled vegetables to farm equipment. Robert Chen had come to Wyoming from San Francisco 15 years earlier and had built a successful business through hard work and fair dealing. He was a quiet man who minded his own business and expected others to do the same. Cole found him in the back, inventorying stock. "Mr. Barrett," Chen looked up from his ledger. "What can I do for you?" "I need a favor. A big one." Chen set down his pencil. "I'm listening." Cole explained the situation, carefully, leaving out details that weren't necessary, but being honest about the core facts. An elderly woman being pursued by relatives who'd stolen from her. Letters that needed to reach a lawyer in Laramie without being intercepted. "These relatives," Chen said slowly. "They're the ones who hired Pike to watch the post office?" "Yes." Chen's face hardened. "Pike tried to intimidate my wife last week, said we should be careful about who we do business with. I don't take kindly to threats." "So you'll help?" "I'll take your letter to Laramie, deliver it personally to this lawyer." Chen paused. "But I want to meet the woman you're protecting. Make sure she's really in trouble and not just a confused old lady being used by someone else." "Fair enough. Can you come to the ranch tonight after dark?" That evening, Robert Chen arrived on a quiet horse, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Cole led him into the kitchen where Margaret waited, Martha standing protectively beside her. "Mrs. Doyle," Chen said with a small bow, "your situation has been explained to me. I'd like to hear it from you directly, if you don't mind." Margaret told her story, not the abbreviated version she'd given Cole and Martha, but the full truth. Her marriage to James, her sister's death, Thomas and Beatrice's betrayal, the fraudulent incompetence declaration, being abandoned on the road, nearly dying in Willow Creek. She spoke calmly and clearly, her voice never wavering, her facts precise. When she finished, Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I lost my own parents to family greed. They owned a successful restaurant in San Francisco. My uncle convinced them to sign it over to him, said he'd manage it better. 3 months later, they were working as dishwashers in their own establishment. They died within a year, both of them. Broken hearts," the doctor said. "I'm so sorry," Margaret said softly. "Don't be sorry. Use it." Chen's eyes were hard. "Use it to fight, because men like your nephew, like my uncle, they count on decent people being too polite, too frightened, too worn down to resist. Prove them wrong." "Well, I intend to." "Good." Chen pulled out the letter Margaret had written. "I leave Monday morning. I'll have this in Jonathan Walsh's hands by Wednesday afternoon. What else do you need from Laramie?" "Information," Margaret said. "Jonathan mentioned he was researching other cases of Dr. Finch declaring people incompetent. If he has names, addresses, I need to know. Even if those people won't testify, I need to know who they are." "Consider it done." Chen stood. "And Mrs. Doyle, when this is over, when you've won, because I believe you will win, come by the mercantile. First month's supplies are on me." After Chen left, Margaret finally allowed herself to sit down heavily. "I've spent 3 months feeling powerless. It's strange to have allies." "You've always had allies," Martha corrected. "You just didn't know it yet." The next 3 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Thomas returned from Laramie on the 3rd day, riding into Sweetwater with official-looking papers in his saddlebag and a triumphant expression on his cold face. But when he went looking for Sheriff Daniels to enforce his warrant, he found the sheriff's office locked and a note saying Daniels had gone north on county business, return date uncertain. Thomas's rage was apparently spectacular. Henderson reported he'd turned purple and sworn so violently that Mrs. Henderson had covered her ears and retreated to the back room. "He's demanding the deputy enforce the warrant," Henderson told the gathered crowd at the general store, enjoying his role as town gossip. "But Deputy Morrison says he's not authorized to act on warrants from Laramie County without the sheriff's approval. Thomas is fit to be tied." Cole heard this secondhand from Chen, who'd stopped by the ranch on his way out of town. "Morrison's a good man," Chen said. "He won't be bullied, but he also won't hold out forever. You've got until Daniels comes back, then you're out of time." "We know. Jonathan's letter is in my saddlebag. I'll have it to him by tomorrow night." Chen mounted his horse. "Stay strong, Mrs. Doyle. Justice is slow, but it's coming." With Chen gone and Daniels away, the ranch felt like a fortress under siege. Thomas couldn't legally search the property without the sheriff to enforce the warrant, but nothing stopped him from watching. Pike and his men took up residence near the property line, close enough to see anyone coming or going but far enough away that Cole couldn't legally run them off. "They're waiting for us to make a mistake," Martha observed, watching the distant campfire through the window. "Then we don't make mistakes," Cole said. But the pressure was taking its toll. Margaret barely slept, afraid that every sound was Thomas breaking in to seize her. Emma grew clingy and anxious, having nightmares about bad men taking Miss Margaret away. Martha's temper grew shorter with each passing day, and Cole found himself checking and rechecking the rifles, making sure they were loaded and ready. On the 5th day, a rider came from town. Not one of Thomas's men, but a young boy named Timothy, who sometimes ran errands for the mercantile. "Letter for Mrs. Doyle," Timothy said breathlessly, handing Cole an envelope. "Mr. Chen sent it ahead by courier, said it was urgent." Cole gave the boy a coin and retreated into the house. The letter was from Jonathan Walsh, and Margaret's hands shook as she broke the seal. "He's found them," she breathed. 3 other people Dr. Finch declared incompetent. 3 others who had family members take control of their estates under questionable circumstances. "Will they testify?" Cole asked. Margaret scanned the letter. "One has died. An elderly man whose son sold his home and business, declared him incompetent when he protested. He passed away 6 months ago in the very institution Thomas threatened to put me in." Her voice caught. "Jonathan says the conditions were terrible." "What about the other 2? "One is still living with the family who declared her incompetent, a woman named Sarah Pritchard. But Jonathan found the 3rd, a man named William Hastings. He managed to fight the declaration, proved he was competent, and got his assets back. Jonathan says he's willing to testify about Dr. Finch, about how the whole examination was a sham designed to rubber stamp whatever the Payne family wanted." "That's huge," Martha said. "That's proof the conservatorship was fraudulent. It's proof Dr. Finch is corrupt. It's not direct proof that my specific conservatorship was fraudulent." Margaret set down the letter. "But it's something. It's more than we had yesterday." "What else does Jonathan say?" "He's filed a motion to have my case heard by a judge in Laramie. Argues that since Thomas obtained his warrant there, it's appropriate for that court to hear the full case. He's asking for an emergency hearing to determine my competency and review the conservatorship." Margaret looked up. "The hearing is set for next Tuesday, 8 days from now." The kitchen fell silent as they all did the math. Daniels was due back in 3 days. With him would come enforcement of Thomas's warrant. They had to keep Margaret hidden for 3 more days, then somehow get her to Laramie for a hearing without Thomas intercepting them. "It's impossible," Martha said flatly. "The moment Daniels enforces that warrant, Thomas will have men searching every inch of this property. We can't hide her in the house for 3 days while they're actively looking." "Then we move her again," Cole said, "before Daniels gets back." "To where?" "Thomas is watching the property. The moment we ride out with an extra person, he'll know." "Not if that extra person is hidden." They all turned to look at him. "The supply wagon," Cole explained. "We load it up like we're going to town for provisions. Margaret hides in the back under the supplies. We drive right past Thomas's camp in broad daylight. He sees a wagon going to town, nothing unusual." "And then what?" Margaret asked. "Then we don't go to town. We take the east road, circle around, and head for Laramie. Get you there 3 days early, hide you at Jonathan's office until the hearing." "That's 3 days on the road in winter," Martha protested. 3 days exposed, with Thomas probably sending men after you when he realizes the wagon didn't come back." "I'll go with them," Emma said suddenly. "Absolutely not," Cole said immediately. "Why not? If it's just you and Miss Margaret, it looks suspicious. But if it's our whole family going to visit Grandma's cousin in Laramie, it's normal. People travel for family all the time." Cole looked at his daughter, seeing not a 6-year-old child, but someone who'd grown far too wise, far too fast. "Emma, she's right," Martha interrupted. "A family trip looks normal. A rancher and an old woman sneaking off in a supply wagon looks like exactly what it is, an escape." "Then you come too, Ma." "Can't. Someone needs to stay here, maintain the ranch, answer questions when Daniels and Thomas come looking. If we all disappear, it confirms everything Thomas suspects." Cole wanted to argue, wanted to find any other solution, but he knew they were right. The best chance they had was to hide in plain sight, to be so obvious that Thomas overlooked them entirely. "We leave tomorrow morning," he said finally. "Before first light. By the time Thomas realizes we're not coming back, we'll be too far ahead to catch." That night, they prepared in tense silence. Cole maintained the wagon, checking wheels and harnesses. Martha packed supplies, food, blankets, everything they'd need for 3 days of winter travel. Margaret wrote out her testimony, documenting every detail of Thomas's betrayal in case something happened before the hearing. And Emma, in her own way, prepared by drawing pictures of the ranch to take with them, little pieces of home to carry into the unknown. At dinner, Martha pulled Emma aside. "You're being very brave, sweetheart. But you need to understand, this journey is dangerous. There might be times when you're scared, when you want to come home. Can you be strong even then?" Emma looked at Miss Margaret across the table, at the woman who'd taught her to embroider, who'd told her stories and made her laugh again after her mother died. "Miss Margaret was strong when she was scared. I can be too." Martha hugged her granddaughter tightly. "Your mother would be so proud of you." They went to bed early, knowing they'd need to rise before dawn. But none of them slept well. Cole lay awake listening to the wind, thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Margaret stared at the ceiling in Emma's room, memorizing the patterns in the wood grain. Emma curled up next to her, one small hand clutching Margaret's nightgown as if afraid she might disappear. And Martha sat in his kitchen with a cup of cold coffee, looking at the photographs on the mantel. Her late husband, her daughter-in-law Sarah, and all the ghosts of people who taught her that sometimes doing the right thing meant taking terrible risks. At 4 a.m, Cole rose and dressed in the darkness. He woke Emma gently, then knocked on Margaret's door. "It's time." They loaded the wagon by lantern light, moving quietly but quickly. The ranch dogs watched with curious eyes but made no sound, as if they understood the need for stealth. Cole hitched the horses, checking and rechecking the harness. Margaret and Emma climbed into the back, arranging themselves among the supply crates and blankets. Martha appeared with a basket of food. "Enough for 3 days, plus extra in case you need it." She hugged Emma fiercely. "You take care of Miss Margaret." "I will, Grandma." "And Cole," Martha's voice caught. "Come back safe, all of you." Cole embraced his mother. "We will. Keep the fires burning." As the wagon pulled away from the ranch, Margaret lifted the corner of the canvas to look back. Martha stood on the porch, a small figure silhouetted by lamplight, one hand raised in farewell. Then the darkness swallowed her, and they were alone on the road. They passed Thomas's camp just as the first gray light touched the eastern sky. Pike was awake, tending the fire. He looked up as the wagon approached, his eyes sharp and suspicious. "Early start," he called. "Got business in town," Cole called back, not slowing. "Thought you went to town just yesterday. Forgot something. Happens." Pike stood, hand on his gun. "Seems like a lot of forgetting lately." Cole kept the wagon moving. "Seems like a lot of minding other people's business lately." He felt Pike's eyes on them as they passed, felt the weight of suspicion like a physical thing, but the wagon rolled on, and Pike didn't follow. Not yet. They reached the fork in the road just as the sun broke over the horizon. Left led to Sweetwater. Right led east, toward the distant mountains and Laramie beyond. Cole turned right. Behind them, too far away to see, Pike mounted his horse and rode hard for town. He found Thomas Doyle at the boarding house, just finishing breakfast. "Barrett's on the move," Pike reported. "Him and what looks like his whole family. Took the East Road." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "The East Road goes nowhere. Nothing out that way but wilderness. Unless you're circling around to avoid being followed." "How long ago?" 20 minutes, maybe less." Thomas stood so abruptly his chair fell over. "Get the men, all of them. We're going after him." Within the hour, Thomas Doyle and 5 hired men were riding hard on the East Road, following the clear tracks of a heavily loaded wagon in the snow. The chase was on, and there was no turning back now. In the wagon, Emma held Miss Margaret's hand and whispered, "We're going to make it, aren't we?" Margaret squeezed back. "We're going to fight like hell to make it. That's all anyone can do." And ahead, the road to Laramie stretched out like a promise, or a threat. The wagon wheels cut deep ruts through the snow as they climbed into higher elevations, the horses straining against the weight. Cole pushed them as hard as he dared, knowing that speed was their only advantage. Thomas had more men and faster horses, But the wagon had a head start, and Cole knew these mountain roads in ways no city lawyer ever could. By midday, they'd covered 15 miles. Emma sat up front with her father now, scanning the road behind them, while Margaret rested in the back, her feet aching from the cold despite the blankets wrapped around them. "Do you see anything?" Cole asked. Emma squinted against the bright snow. "I think, Daddy, there's dust, way back, like horses kicking it up." Cole's jaw tightened. He'd hoped for more time, but Thomas was nothing if not persistent. "How far?" "Can't tell. Maybe a mile?" "Then we've got maybe 20 minutes before they catch up." Cole scanned the landscape, his mind working through options. The road here ran through a narrow valley with steep sides, no way to leave the trail without abandoning the wagon. And without the wagon, they'd never make it to Laramie in time for the hearing. "What do we do?" Emma's voice was small but steady. "We buy time." Cole spotted what he was looking for, a section of road where a creek crossed beneath a small wooden bridge. The bridge was old, the supports weathered, but it would hold the wagon. Maybe. He pulled the horses to a stop just before the bridge. "Emma, help me with the supplies. Margaret, stay in the wagon." "What are you doing?" Margaret called, making it harder for them to follow. Working quickly, Cole and Emma unloaded half the supply crates, stacking them on the bridge itself. Then Cole took his axe and went to work on the support beams, not cutting them through but weakening them just enough. When Thomas's men tried to cross with their heavier horses, the bridge would collapse. It wouldn't stop them, they could ford the creek, but it would slow them down, force them to be more careful. "Back in the wagon," Cole ordered as he heard the distant sound of approaching hooves. They crossed the bridge carefully, the wood groaning beneath them but holding. On the far side, Cole whipped the horses into a faster pace. Behind them, Thomas Doyle reached the bridge 5 minutes later. He saw the stacked crates, saw the fresh axe marks on the supports, and his face went purple with rage. "He's sabotaging the road! Pike, you and Jackson ford the creek here. The rest of us will test the bridge." "Mr. Doyle, those supports look—" "I don't care how they look. We're not letting him get away." Pike shrugged and guided his horse into the icy creek. The water came up to the horse's chest, and Pike cursed as the cold soaked through his boots. But he made it across, Jackson following. Thomas, impatient and furious, urged his horse onto the bridge. The wood held for 3 steps. On the 4th, with a crack like a gunshot, the center support gave way. Thomas's horse screamed as the bridge collapsed, throwing rider and animal into the freezing water below. The other men rushed to help, hauling Thomas out sputtering and livid. His expensive coat was ruined, his hat lost to the current, and his dignity thoroughly soaked. "I'll see him hanged for this," Thomas snarled, water dripping from his hair. "Attempted murder, destruction of property." "That bridge was already half rotted," Pike observed mildly. "Could have collapsed under anyone." Shut up and get moving. We're still going after them." But the delay had cost them precious time. By the time Thomas's men had all crossed the creek and regrouped, the wagon was nearly out of sight ahead. Inside the wagon, Margaret heard Emma's laugh, bright and genuine despite their circumstances. "Did you really break the bridge, Daddy?" "I made it structurally unsound," Cole corrected with the ghost of a smile. "There's a difference. Grandma's going to love this story, if we live to tell it." They made camp that night in a sheltered spot off the main road, a grove of pines that blocked the wind and hid their fire from distant eyes. Cole unhitched the horses and rubbed them down while Margaret and Emma prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. "How far behind are they?" Margaret asked quietly. "Far enough. They won't risk traveling in the dark, not on unfamiliar roads. We've got until morning." Cole accepted the plate Emma handed him. "But tomorrow's going to be harder. We're in open country once we leave the valley. They'll be able to see us for miles." "Can we outrun them?" "Not with the wagon, but we don't need to outrun them all the way to Laramie, just far enough." Cole pulled out a worn map, studying it by firelight. "There's a way station about 30 miles ahead. Used to be a trading post before the railroad changed the routes. A man named Gus Whitmore runs it now. He's an old friend of my father's." You think he'll help?" "I think he owes the Barrett family a few favors, and I think he's never been fond of people who pick on women and children." Cole folded the map. "We reach Whitmore's by tomorrow night. We'll have options. He's got fresh horses, supplies, and he knows these mountains better than anyone." Emma yawned hugely, and Margaret pulled her close. Someone needs sleep. I'm not tired, Emma protested, even as her eyes drooped. Of course not. But I am, so you'll have to keep me warm while I rest. Margaret wrapped a blanket around them both, and within minutes Emma was breathing the deep, even breaths of childhood sleep. Cole and Margaret sat in companionable silence, watching the fire burn low. Finally, Margaret said, I never thanked you properly for all of this, for risking everything. Don't thank me yet. We're not there yet. But we're trying. That's more than I thought I'd have 3 months ago. She was quiet for a moment. When I was lying in that creek, when I thought I was dying, I'd made peace with it. Thought maybe I deserved it for being such a fool, for trusting the wrong people. You didn't deserve any of what Thomas did. No, but I enabled it by being blind to who he really was. I saw what I wanted to see. Family, connection, someone to leave my legacy to. She looked down at Emma sleeping peacefully against her side. And then I found real family, not the kind you're born into, but the kind you choose, the kind that chooses you back. Cole felt a lump in his throat. Emma's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one. Margaret's eyes were bright with tears. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes next, I want you to know, these months with you, with Martha and Emma, they've been the happiest of my life. Happier than any ball or party or society event I ever attended, because this is real. This is what matters. We're going to win, Margaret. We're going to get to that courthouse. We're going to prove Thomas is a fraud, and you're going to get your life back. Maybe. But even if we don't, even if somehow Thomas wins, he can't take this away. He can steal my money and my property, but he can't steal what you've given me. Hope, dignity, family. She wiped her eyes. That's mine forever. They slept in shifts that night, one always watching while the others rested. Cole took first watch, then Margaret, her rifle, the one Cole had taught her to shoot during the long winter weeks, resting across her lap as she scanned the darkness for movement. When dawn broke cold and clear, they were already moving. The horses were tired but game, and the wagon made good time across the flatter terrain. By noon, they could see the distant smudge of smoke that marked Whitmore's station. They could also see the riders behind them, closer now. 5 men on horseback, pushing hard. They're going to catch us before we reach the station, Emma said, her voice tight with fear. Cole calculated distances and speeds. Emma was right. The station was still 2 miles away, and Thomas's men would overtake them in less than 1. Change of plans, Cole said. Margaret, take the reins. What? Cole, I can barely... You can drive a wagon straight ahead for 2 miles. That's all you need to do. Get to Whitmore's. Tell him Cole Barrett sent you and you need help. He'll understand. Cole was already grabbing his rifle and checking the ammunition. What are you going to do? Buy you time. Emma, you stay with Margaret. Don't stop for anything. Understand? Daddy, no! Emma's face was white with terror. You can't. Cole pulled his daughter into a fierce hug. I'll be fine. But I need you to be brave for Miss Margaret. Can you do that? Emma nodded against his chest, trembling. Cole jumped down from the moving wagon and took cover behind a boulder beside the road. From here, he had a clear view of the approaching riders and a decent defensive position. He settled the rifle against his shoulder and waited. In the wagon, Margaret drove with shaking hands. Emma pressed against her side. He'll be all right, Margaret said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Your father's a survivor. So are you, Emma whispered. You both have to be all right. You have to. Thomas Doyle saw the lone figure behind the boulder and raised his hand, signaling his men to slow. They approached cautiously, spreading out in a line. Barrett, Thomas called. This is foolish. We have the law on our side. You're just making it worse for yourself. Law says I can defend my property from trespassers, Cole called back, and you're on my property. We're on a public road. Road crosses my land, makes it my property, and I'm well within my rights to tell you to turn around and go home. Thomas's face twisted with fury. Where is she? Where's my aunt? Safe from you. That's all you need to know. I'll have you arrested, thrown in jail. You'll lose your ranch, your daughter. Then I guess you better make sure you live long enough to do all that. Cole's voice was cold. Because right now, you're in my sights, and I'm a pretty good shot. The hired men shifted nervously. Being paid to track someone was one thing. Being in a gunfight with a desperate rancher was another entirely. "You won't shoot me," Thomas said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Won't I? You threaten my family. You're chasing an old woman who's done nothing wrong except trust the wrong people. What exactly do you think stops me from putting a bullet in you right now?" Pike spoke up. "Mr. Doyle, maybe we should—" "Shut up." Thomas glared at his men. "He's bluffing. 1 man against 5. He won't risk it." But Cole had already made his calculations. He fired once, the shot kicking up dirt 2 feet in front of Thomas's horse. The animal reared, nearly throwing Thomas again. "Next one's not a warning," Cole said. The hired men were already turning their horses. Whatever Thomas was paying, it wasn't enough for this. "You're all fired!" Thomas screamed at their retreating backs. "Cowards! I'll have you all!" "Just you and me now," Cole interrupted. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around and ride back to Sweetwater. You're going to wait there for the sheriff to come back. And you're going to accept that you lost. I have a court order for a county you're not in, signed by a judge who doesn't have jurisdiction here, based on fraudulent testimony from a corrupt doctor." Cole stood, rifle still trained on Thomas. "You really want to die for that?" Thomas stared at him, hatred burning in his eyes. But he was alone, outgunned, and finally beginning to understand that Cole Barrett wasn't bluffing. "This isn't over," Thomas said. "It will be after the hearing, one way or another." Thomas turned his horse and rode away, his back stiff with wounded pride and impotent rage. Cole waited until he was out of sight, then ran. The wagon had a good lead now, and he could see it approaching the trading post in the distance. He covered the 2 miles at a pace that left him gasping, arriving just as Margaret pulled the wagon into Whitmore's yard. Gus Whitmore was a mountain of a man, 6.5 feet tall, with a beard like a biblical prophet, and hands that could crush walnuts. He emerged from the trading post and took in the scene, a terrified old woman, a crying child, and Cole Barrett running up like the devil himself was chasing him. "Well, hell," Gus said in a voice like grinding stone. "Must be Tuesday." Inside the trading post, over coffee and the hastily told story, Gus nodded thoughtfully. "Your pa pulled me out of a burning cabin back in '59. Said I didn't owe him, but I figure I owe his son just the same." "We need fresh horses," Cole said, "and maybe someone to ride back toward Sweetwater, make sure Thomas really left." "Can do better than that." Gus pulled out a battered watch. "Supply wagon leaves for Laramie in about 2 hours. Go straight through, no stops. You and yours can ride in the back, covered up nice and comfortable. Thomas Doyle won't know you're 50 feet away from him when he passes you going the other direction." Margaret laughed, the sound surprising her. "That's brilliant. That's practical. Plus, driver's my nephew. He'll get you to Jonathan Walsh's office safe and sound." Gus refilled their coffee cups. "Meanwhile, I'll make sure word gets to Sheriff Daniels about Thomas's little chase. Assault with intent, destruction of property, threatening a lawful citizen. Daniels won't be happy about that." 2 hours later, they were rolling toward Laramie in the back of Gus's supply wagon, buried under barrels of flour and crates of canned goods. The driver, a taciturn young man named Pete, whistled cheerfully as he drove. They passed Thomas Doyle on the road about 5 miles from the trading post. Cole, peeking through a gap in the canvas, saw Thomas sitting his horse, looking defeated and exhausted. He'd clearly given up the chase and was heading back to Sweetwater empty-handed. "Goodbye, Thomas," Margaret whispered. "See you in court." They arrived in Laramie late the next evening, tired and sore, but triumphant. Jonathan Walsh met them at his office, a small man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, taking her hands. "When I heard what Thomas was trying, I feared the worst. But here you are." "Here I am." Margaret's voice was firm. "And I'm ready to fight." The next 4 days were a blur of preparation. Jonathan had assembled an impressive case, documentation of every property sale, every account closure, testimonies from neighbors who'd seen Margaret before the conservatorship and declared her perfectly sound. He had William Hastings ready to testify about Dr. Finch's fraudulent examinations, and he'd even tracked down the way station keeper who'd seen Thomas's men abandon Margaret. "We have enough," Jonathan said the night before the hearing. "Not guaranteed, but enough." "What are our chances?" Cole asked. "Better than 50-50. The judge is fair, and Thomas's case has holes big enough to drive a wagon through. But conservatorships are hard to overturn. The burden of proof is high. Margaret straightened her shoulders. She was wearing a proper dress now, one Jonathan's wife had lent her, and her silver hair was pinned in the style she'd worn in her society days. She looked every inch the dignified woman she'd once been. "Then I'll meet that burden," she said. "I've come too far to fail now." The courtroom was packed the next morning. Word had spread about the case: the wealthy widow versus the grasping nephew, the old woman who'd nearly died versus the lawyer who'd left her to perish. Half of Laramie seemed to have shown up to watch. Thomas sat at the plaintiff's table with two expensive lawyers from Denver looking confident and composed. Beatrice sat behind him, her face a mask of righteous concern. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Blackwell, called the court to order. "This is a hearing to determine the mental competency of Mrs. Margaret Doyle and to review the conservatorship established by her nephew, Thomas Doyle. Mr. Walsh, you may present your case." What followed was 3 hours of testimony and evidence. Jonathan laid out Thomas's systematic liquidation of Margaret's assets, the suspiciously low sale prices, the connections between buyers and Thomas's business associates. He brought William Hastings to the stand, who described in devastating detail how Dr. Finch had declared him incompetent after a 5-minute examination, then accepted payment from Hastings' brother-in-law. "And when you challenged the declaration?" Jonathan asked. "I had to hire 3 separate doctors to examine me. All 3 found me perfectly competent. The judge overturned Finch's declaration and sanctioned him for professional misconduct." Hastings looked directly at Thomas. "But by then, my brother-in-law had already sold my home and taken $30,000 from my accounts. I got some of it back, but not all." "Never all." Thomas's lawyers objected, argued, tried to discredit the testimony, but the damage was done. Then Margaret took the stand. She told her story calmly and clearly, from James's death to Thomas's betrayal to lying in Willow Creek waiting to die. She described Cole finding her, the Barrett family taking her in, the months of hiding and planning. She spoke without anger or theatrics, just a simple recitation of facts. "Mrs. Doyle," Thomas's lead attorney said during cross-examination, "you claim you're not confused, yet you made the decision to sign over your assets to your nephew. Doesn't that suggest impaired judgment?" "It suggests trust," Margaret replied, "which is different from incompetence. I trusted my nephew because he was family. That trust was misplaced, but the capacity to trust isn't a sign of mental deficiency. It's a sign of humanity." But Dr. Finch's examination found, Dr. Finch's examination consisted of him asking me 3 questions, deciding I answered too slowly, and declaring me incompetent. The whole thing took less time than this cross-examination. Margaret's eyes were steel. "I can recite the Gettysburg Address, calculate compound interest, and tell you the name of every territorial governor since 1863. Would you like me to demonstrate?" "That won't be necessary, because I'm happy to. Or perhaps you'd like to test my memory another way. Ask me about James's business dealings, the properties we owned, the investments we made. I remember all of it, every single detail, because I'm not incompetent, counselor. I was simply trusting, and I won't make that mistake again." When she stepped down, Cole saw several members of the gallery nodding approvingly. Thomas took the stand in his own defense, and Jonathan tore him apart. Question after question exposed the contradictions in his story. Why he'd sold properties so quickly, why the buyers were all his associates, why he'd never sought a second medical opinion before declaring his aunt incompetent. "You claim you acted in her best interests," Jonathan said, "yet you put her on a coach with $20 and sent her to an institution known for its abysmal conditions. That's care?" She was confused, dangerous to herself. The institution was appropriate for someone you wanted to disappear, because a dead aunt can't contest a conservatorship, can she, Mr. Doyle? "I never wanted her dead." "No? Then why didn't you search for her when she disappeared from that way station? Why didn't you notify authorities that a vulnerable, incompetent woman was missing? You had her declared incompetent, claimed to be responsible for her welfare, and then you just let her vanish. Didn't even file a missing person report until months later, and then only after you'd liquidated most of her assets." Thomas had no good answer for that. The hearing concluded at sunset. Judge Blackwell announced she would render her decision in the morning, giving both sides time to prepare final arguments. That night, in Jonathan's office, they waited. Margaret sat by the window, looking out at the Laramie streets. Emma had fallen asleep on the sofa, exhausted by the long day. Cole and Jonathan reviewed documents, looking for anything they might have missed. "We did everything we could," Jonathan said finally. "The rest is up to Judge Blackwell." "What do you really think our chances are?" Margaret asked. Jonathan considered. "Honestly, I think you won. Your testimony was compelling, the evidence against Thomas is damning, and Judge Blackwell doesn't suffer fools. But I've been surprised before." "So have I," Margaret said quietly. "I've learned that the only thing certain in this life is uncertainty." They returned to the courthouse the next morning to find it even more crowded than before. News had spread that the judge was rendering a decision, and it seemed half the territory wanted to witness it. Judge Blackwell took her seat and surveyed the packed courtroom. "I've reviewed all the testimony and evidence presented in this case," she began, "and I've come to several conclusions. First, the medical examination conducted by Dr. Harrison Finch was inadequate to the point of malpractice. A 5-minute interview is insufficient to determine mental competency, particularly in a case involving significant financial assets. Second, the speed with which Mr. Thomas Doyle liquidated his aunt's properties and the connections between buyers and Mr. Doyle's business interests suggest motivations beyond Mrs. Doyle's welfare. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Mrs. Doyle's testimony was clear, coherent, and demonstrated full mental capacity. She showed excellent recall, sound judgment, and an understanding of complex financial matters." Cole felt hope rising in his chest. "Therefore," Judge Blackwell continued, "I am ruling that the conservatorship established over Mrs. Margaret Doyle is hereby dissolved. Mrs. Doyle is declared fully competent to manage her own affairs. Furthermore, I am ordering a full audit of all transactions conducted under the conservatorship, with particular attention to property sales and account transfers. Mr. Doyle, you are to provide complete documentation of every asset disposition within 30 days. The courtroom erupted. Margaret sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. Emma threw her arms around her, laughing and crying at once. Cole felt his own eyes burning, but Judge Blackwell wasn't finished. "Additionally, I am referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor for potential criminal charges. The evidence presented suggests not just civil wrongdoing, but possible fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse. A grand jury will determine if criminal proceedings are warranted." She looked directly at Thomas, who had gone white as snow. "Mr. Doyle, I suggest you retain criminal counsel. You're going to need it." She brought down her gavel. "This court is adjourned." The aftermath was chaos. Thomas tried to leave immediately, but 2 territorial marshals were waiting to question him. Beatrice fled the courtroom, her face covered, and Margaret was surrounded by well-wishers, people who'd followed the case and wanted to congratulate her. Jonathan pushed through the crowd to reach her. "We did it! You did it!" "We're not done yet," Margaret said, wiping her eyes. "The audit, recovering the assets, will take time. But you've got time now. You've got your life back." Jonathan smiled. "And from what the judge said, Thomas is going to have a very hard time avoiding criminal prosecution. The territorial prosecutor is aggressive, especially in cases involving the elderly." Over the next weeks, the audit revealed the full extent of Thomas's theft. Of Margaret's original assets worth over $200,000, Thomas had liquidated nearly half, keeping most of the money for himself through various shell companies and fraudulent investments. The properties sold to his associates were bought back at fair market value through court order. Bank accounts were unfrozen and returned to Margaret's control. Thomas was indicted on 12 counts of fraud and embezzlement. He tried to flee to California but was arrested in Denver. His trial was set for the fall. Dr. Harrison Finch lost his medical license after the Territorial Medical Board investigated and found a pattern of fraudulent competency declarations stretching back years. And Beatrice, facing her own legal troubles, disappeared somewhere back east, leaving no forwarding address. Spring came to Wyoming with a rush of green and the smell of rain on sage. Margaret returned to the Barrett Ranch not as a refugee, but as a landowner in her own right. With her recovered assets, she'd purchased the property adjacent to Cole's ranch, 1,200 acres of prime grazing land with water rights and timber. "I'm not buying your ranch," she'd told Cole firmly when she made the offer. "I'm buying land next to family. There's a difference." She'd also established a trust fund for Emma's education, enough to send her to any university in the country when the time came. And she'd made a substantial anonymous donation to the way station where the kind driver had left her, ensuring it would continue to serve travelers in need. But more than the money or the property, what mattered most was the small house she built on her new land, close enough to the Barrett Ranch that Emma could visit daily, far enough to maintain independence. It had a wide porch where she could sit and watch the mountains, a kitchen where she and Martha could cook together, and a spare room that was always ready for guests. On a warm June evening, the two families gathered for dinner: Cole, Martha, Emma, and Margaret, now inseparable. They ate on Margaret's new porch as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Tell me a story, Miss Margaret," Emma said, curled up against the old woman's side. "What kind of story?" "A true one, about brave people." Margaret smiled, stroking Emma's hair. "Well, once upon a time there was a man who found a dying woman in a creek. He could have left her there. It would have been easier, safer. But instead he carried her home, and his family, instead of turning her away, took her in, fed her, healed her, protected her when danger came." "That's our story," Emma said. "Yes, and the man's daughter was the bravest of all because she shared her family with a stranger and made room in her heart for someone new. And the man's mother was the wisest because she knew that family isn't about blood, it's about who you choose to love and who chooses to love you back." Cole, listening from the doorway, felt his throat tighten. His life had changed in ways he never could have imagined that October day. He'd gained not just a friend, but a second mother for Emma, a business partner who understood ranching in ways that surprised him, and a reminder that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, was always worth it. "And the woman they saved?" Emma asked. "What about her?" "She learned that you can lose everything: money, property, the trappings of wealth, and still be rich beyond measure if you have people who love you. She learned that home isn't a place, it's people. And she learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best thing, if you're brave enough to keep fighting." Margaret looked out over the land she now owned, land she'd purchased with money reclaimed from thieves, land that bordered the ranch where she'd found her second chance at life. The ranch where Cole still worked from dawn to dusk, where Martha still baked bread that made the whole house smell like heaven, where Emma still collected pretty stones and believed in magic. "And they all lived happily ever after?" Emma asked sleepily. Margaret kissed the top of her head. "They all lived. Some days were happy, some were hard, but they faced them together. And that, sweetheart, is better than any fairy tale ending." As the stars came out over Wyoming and the crickets began their evening song, Cole reflected on how a single act of kindness had rippled outward, changing not just one life, but all of their lives. He'd saved Margaret from the creek, but in truth, she'd saved them all. From loneliness, from grief, from forgetting that the world still had goodness in it if you were brave enough to reach for it. The old woman who'd been left to die had become the glue that held them together, the grandmother Emma needed, the friend Cole and Martha cherished. She'd repaid their kindness not with money, though she'd tried, but with something far more valuable: her presence, her wisdom, her fierce love. And on that warm spring evening, as they sat together watching the sky turn from gold to purple to deep velvet blue, they were more than neighbors, more than friends. They were family in the truest sense of the word, bound not by obligation or blood, but by choice, by sacrifice, by the kind of love that weathers every storm. Margaret Doyle had walked through wilderness to find them, and in doing so, she'd found home.